Now we come to the Legion organization. First, the hierarchy and structure. The organization and structure of the Dark Angels Legion predated the standard patterns of military organization laid out by the Principia Bellicosa. Indeed, many of the doctrines and formations in common use throughout the Legiones Astartes found their origins in the early practices of the First Legion. In fact, this would seem to have been one of the prime missions gifted to the Legion by the Emperor to discover, refine, and perfect those strategies and patterns that would allow his new gene-crafted transhuman warriors to perform at peak efficiency. When Imperial scholars speak of the standard form of a Space Marine Legion, they speak of the Dark Angels, for it was in the sacrifice of the First Legion that these structures were first born. While Robert Guilliman would later add to and adapt this structure, even that superlative general built upon the foundations that had been defined by the wars of the First Legion before the return of Lionel Johnson. Even the Lion, upon resuming command of his legion, would bow before the wisdom of these founders, content to bind this original structure to a single vision and authority, and it remained largely unchanged in form until the second founding. In the earliest years of its existence, the First Legion would experiment with every form of war, every style of organization and formation, with a host of warriors dedicated to almost any tactical or strategic ploy. This meant that the Legion contained specialists suited to every opponent and battlefield, but it lacked a cohesive structure to organize those warriors. It was by its very nature chaotic and fluid, ever-changing, as certain tactics fell out of favor and new ones rose to prominence, and as such, it lacked an easily defined sense of organization. This chaos was a necessary tool for its purpose, and in time, it would resolve into order, into a system of supporting and overlapping formations that existed in parallel and allowed the Dark Angels to confront any foe on any battlefield and overcome them. This system of specialized formations stood at the very heart of the First Legion and was the core around which it was built. Of hosts and orders. The First Legion's hierarchical unit structure was composed of a descending hierarchy of chapters, companies, and squads, as was any other, according to the dictates of the Principia Bellicosa. This was the shape of its overt hierarchy, the uncloaked face it showed to its brother Space Marine legions and the Imperium at large. Yet each of the warriors of the Legion also held a concurrent position in a second, covert layer of organization, one they kept hidden from those not of the Legion. This secret strata of organization was composed primarily of two distinct bodies, the Great Hosts and the Orders of Battle of Hecatonistica. Both of these bodies served to allow the collection and codification of martial knowledge by the warriors of the Legion, and to see that this knowledge was available on the battlefield when it was needed most by the generals of the Great Crusade. The Great Hosts were the larger of the two covert organizations, numbering at first in the dozens, with each individual force claiming the loyalty of hundreds of individual warriors. The hosts were each dedicated to the perfection of one art of war, as some specialized in siege warfare, others in the art of skirmish, and yet more in the brutal discipline of shock assault and many other tactics besides. The hosts did not fight as cohesive formations in most situations, being spread across the various chapters and companies of the Legion. Any given unit might comprise members of a variety of different hosts, all working together, lending their experience and skills to their battle brothers, so that the whole had a value far greater than any individual piece. No matter the challenge faced by even the least unit of the First Legion, it would find at least one expert in its ranks, a distinct advantage when compared to many of the younger legions, each of which was dedicated to a single brand of conquest and ill-equipped to fight outside its preferred sphere. Only in the most dire of situations did a host assemble en masse, its acolytes called out from the ranks to form a single body of those most skilled in their chosen art, be it the siege rites of the host of stone or the breaching clades of the host of the void. Such a body could be a potent force in its chosen element, more than capable of turning the tide of even the direst battle. Each host followed the same organizational structure, each with its own master, marshals, and initiates organized into cells scattered across the chapters of the Legion. These cells were embedded at the very heart of the Legion's core, operating alongside the companies and squads of its open and public hierarchy. Any given squad might very well include members from several cells, each bound in service to different hosts. They were at once brothers, sealed by the oaths made to Legion and Sergeant, and made strangers by the secret ties and mysteries of their host. A warrior owed his obedience to both his commander in the ranks of the Legion's public hierarchy and his superior in the hidden society of his host, with only the subtle context of tradition to tell when one held authority over the other. It is a testament to the fortitude of the minds and the enduring loyalty of these warriors that such a complex system not only functioned on the field of battle, but excelled in bringing triumph to the First Legion. The great hosts of the First Legion recruited openly and wildly among the uninitiated warriors of the Legion. When new intakes of recruits reached front-line companies, they would find themselves under constant scrutiny from the appointed procurators of the hosts, each seeking signs of the aspirant's worthiness to join their hosts in their conduct on the field of battle. Those selected by the procurators, having already faced their trials upon the battlefield and in the subtle tests conducted by their battle brothers and commanders, would be swiftly inducted into the most basic tenets of the host and granted the right to bear its mark upon their power armor. Those warriors initiated into a host met freely within the precincts of the Legion's holdings and encampments to debate strategy and the proper use of arms, with those of the higher ranks responsible for the training of those below them. These gatherings, though not secret, were considered a private matter of the host, a forum where a warrior's standing within his host stood greater than that of his formal rank within the Legion. Members could speak on its business, the practice and protection of their unique rites of battle and tradition, without fear of censure, for it was considered the duty of the hosts to preserve the Legion through their unstinting pursuit of excellence. The Orders of Battle, also known as the Hecatonistica, though more numerous, boasted far fewer adherents than the hosts. Of the hundreds of individual orders, most could count no more than a few dozen initiates, a mere handful of warriors by comparison to the vast hosts and chapters of the Greater Legion. Such warrior fraternities could not disseminate their knowledge across an entire legion in the same manner as the hosts, and harbored a skill set ill-disposed towards such a use. The Orders of Battle were experts in a single bloody aspect of war, the destruction of a singular foe or the mastery of some aberrant field of conflict. When a battle group of the First Legion encountered a foe worthy of their hatred, or a field of battle whose nature defied their contempt, it was to the Orders of Battle that they turned, forming a cenobium, a cadre of the warriors from an order trained to negate the foe, to lead the assault and to turn all their secret knowledge into a weapon to smite the enemies of mankind. Each Order of Battle maintained a strict hierarchy, though no two were exactly the same, with each organized to best serve the aims and lore kept by that order. For, unlike the hosts, which openly recruited and shared much of their knowledge when called to battle, the orders were of a more secretive nature. The true position and nature of the ranks within a given order were only truly understood by their inducted initiates, with a system of ciphers and cryptic signs unique to each order used to mark them out to those who had been inducted into their ranks. Each tier of the order granted an initiate greater understanding of the mysteries it had been created to preserve, and placed upon them a greater burden of responsibility to keep that knowledge ever ready to be called upon at need. The order would meet to affirm their knowledge in the form of rituals and tradition, as well as to train in more practical ways, to keep ready blade and bolt for the day when their knowledge would be required in the name of the Legion and the Imperium. Most orders maintained a sanctum chamber aboard any void ship to which a cell of their members was posted, a private space into which entry was only granted to ordained members of the order and where ritual training and study could be pursued in seclusion. Some of the largest orders controlled space stations, most often based in and around war zones that supported or required their unique skills. The Order of Broken Spears operated an orbital stronghold capable of hosting all 138 known members, set in place above the broken messes and twisting canyons of Argyel 3, a death world whose rock was laced with traces of heavy metals that countered most active sensor systems. Given that the Broken Spears were masters in the art of ambush and the silent war of wits that prevailed in such dense and confusing terrain, this served as the perfect location for the training of its initiates and as a retreat for those veterans seeking to contemplate the teachings of the Order without distraction. These sanctums, whether grand strongholds or Spartan chambers aboard a ship of war, also served a crucial role in the recruitment of new members. Such prospective acolytes were identified by the senior members of a cell by the record of their achievements and skill, and were subject to much debate within the cell before any decision was made. Once summoned by the cell, a warrior could expect to face a series of grueling physical and mental trials, administered in the seclusion of the Order's domain, where these candidates were granted limited rights of entry, though often under binding oaths to hold secret all that was witnessed. Such trials varied wildly between orders, though often presented the very real possibility of serious injury or even death for those that accepted the challenge. The exact nature of these rituals was kept secret, and even those that failed were bound by the honor of the Legion not to speak of that which they had faced. Such was the respect given to the orders of the Hecatonistica by the rank and file warriors of the Legion. Only once fully inducted would they receive the freedom of the Order's domains and the right to begin study of the first tier of the hidden lore of their new warrior brotherhood, and to bear the mark of its acolyte upon the ceramite of their warplate. To hold a position even in the outer circles of one of the orders militant of the Hecatonistica was considered a great honor, and of the entire legion, less than half could claim such an achievement. Though few outside of the ranks of a given order knew the full import of the insignia borne by its adepts, all of the legion's warriors granted the bearer of such a sigil due respect, and few, even amongst the most senior of commanders, would fail to heed their advice, no matter what formal rank they might hold outside the order. Though it was a rare occurrence, some particularly skilled warriors within the legion bore the insignia of more than one of the orders militant upon their armor. In some cases, such warriors had formerly departed one order to take up a position in a new brotherhood, sworn to keep the secrets of their old association, while in the most exceptional of cases, they might hold rank in 2 or more orders at the same time. There are only a handful of examples of this, the most well-known being Lionel Johnson himself, who held the rank of High Preceptor of every order within the Legion, and Knight Captain Atreus Decalion, bearer of the sword Chrysor, who was also a Marshal of the Fire Wing of the Hexagrammaton, was counted as one of the finest swordsmen in the Legion and held station within 3 separate orders, blending the blade techniques of each to form a unique and deadly style of his own. Ultimately, it was this arcane, covert, and deeply layered organization of the First Legion which provided one defense from the corruption of chaos and the traitors in the years just before the outbreak of the Horus Heresy. Horus and Lorgar's warrior lodges found no purchase within the ranks of the Dark Angels, as they were shunned by the preceptors of the Orders Militant and the proctors of the wings of the Hexagrammaton as worthless and beneath them. The Dark Angels thus never suffered corruption due to the actions of Horus and his allies among the traitor legions. Yet even as the heresy ended, they would face their own betrayal from within, driven by the same flaws of jealousy and vainglory that drove the War Master to rebel against the Emperor. The 500. Of all the weapons wielded by the Emperor's legions, it is not cannon or blades that are the most deadly. It is knowledge that has carried us to victories beyond count, and wisdom that has broken empires and kings. Yet still there are those who question why we keep such a potent weapon concealed from our foes within the folds of the Hexagrammaton. From the Lion Codex, the collected words and deeds of Lionel Johnson. The first 500 warriors of the Dark Angels to stand alongside their Primarch on Caliban after arriving on that world with the Emperor would come to be known simply as the 500, an honorary company embedded in the Legion's system of orders militant. Each of the 500 was sworn to a unique duty, bound to gather information and to keep it hidden for the benefit of the Legion, just as the other orders militant, save the subject of their scrutiny, was the Primarch himself. For among all the doctrines of the old hosts of the First Legion, each carefully crafted and honed by centuries of war, they had never accounted for such a manifest icon of war and death as a Primarch. Study was required that they might learn how best to fight at his side, which weapons were best suited to be deployed alongside the Primarch, and how the Legion would need to be reshaped to serve his will. Lionel Johnson himself would prove no more forthcoming to his Gene sons than he had been to his brother Primarchs. Prone to silence and self-reliance, he offered his new legion the chance to prove itself in battle, but gave them no guidance on the means by which they would best earn his respect. The 500 would serve as the Lion's lifeguard, to fight and die ever in his shadow, that the Legion might learn that which their new master was reticent to speak of and earn his favor in war. Their hard-won secrets, enshrined in the tome known as the Lion Codex, was among the most cleverly and completely ciphered records within the Legion, for it contains the sum of their knowledge of Lionel Johnson, his fighting style, and strategies. Such secrets would be valuable beyond reckoning to any foe of the Legion, and just as priceless to his Gene sons, for with the guidance of the Codex, the Council of Masters sought to reshape their Legion in his image. As such, the 500 were its only keepers, and they accepted no new initiates, which ensured that the secrets the company held lived or died with them. The Lion himself never mentioned this enterprise, never uttered one word of praise for the ever-present honor guard at his side, even as their numbers dwindled over time. Yet neither did he forbade them their study, and on the eve of battle he often waited patiently for those of the 500 present to assemble at his side before he set forth. This silent acceptance was counted by the Dark Angels as the ultimate mark of recognition, worth more to them than any honor marking or gaudy touch of victory. The Hexagrammaton. The Primarch Lionel Johnson introduced to the First Legion of the Space Marines the organizational structure he had learned from the Knights of the Order on Caliban. The Lion's tenets of loyalty, discipline, and self-efficiency were incorporated into everything the Legion did. As the First Legion had originally been created from Terran warriors, gifted with the gene seed of the stalwart, if reticent Lion, the Dark Angels had always been regarded as dedicated and serious-minded warriors. Like their primogenitor, they were slow to anger, but tenacious and all but unstoppable once roused. Before the Horus Heresy, a Space Marine Legion might count 10,000 or more warriors under a single command, though the exact number of the Dark Angels Legion in the days of the Great Crusade and the Heresy remain unknown. However, the Legion was considered to be of moderate size for the time. Under the Lion's supervision, the First Legion was reorganized into another parallel series of specialized formations known collectively as the Hexagrammaton and colloquially as the Six Wings. These specialized formations existed outside the regular chain of command and organization of the Legion. These formations were an amalgamation of the Terran pre-Principia Bellicosa approach used by the hosts of the First Legion and the organization of the now proscribed formations of the early Legiones Astartes and Caliban's knightly orders. Before the creation of the first Space Marine Legions, the Legiones Astartes were organized into a formation known as the Six Hosts of the Angels of Death, with each of these hosts having its own specialization and purpose. Following the first reunification with their Primarch Lionel Johnson on Caliban, the Lion incorporated the traditions of the Six Hosts and the Order, and thus the Six Wings were created. The First Legion followed the organizational principles of the Principia Bellicosa, organizing their legion's strength into chapters, which were led by masters, and below them, orders, which were led by paladins. These formations were further broken down into companies led by captains and squads commanded by sergeants. Members of the Six Wings were distributed among squads and companies, where they acted as captains, sergeants, and line legionaries, or in specialized formations when assembled on orders from their respective voted lieutenant of a wing. These voted lieutenants, also called masters, acted as both commander of their wing and often acted as counsel to their primarch. Voted lieutenants were elected by their peers rather than being nominated by a superior. They would then have their nominated successor chosen to command the wing in the event of their untimely death, so as not to interrupt the cohesiveness of a wing's command. The voted lieutenants who served as the chosen leaders of each wing often gathered together in a group known as the Council of Masters, first in the great fortress of the 1st Legion on Grammari, and later wherever the Legion was engaged after being reunited with their Primarch. On the field of battle, a commander responsible for an area of operations or campaign had to request the intervention of one of the 6 wings. When such a request was made and eventually accepted, the members of the requested wing were summoned from their duties when possible in order to assemble and conduct operations under the command of their voted lieutenant's orders. The hexagrammaton formations that existed within the Dark Angels Legion at the time of the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy included the following: the Death Wing, the Raven Wing, the Dread Wing, the Fire Wing, the Iron Wing, and the Storm Wing. The Death Wing and the Raven Wing are still used by the Dark Angels to this day in their hunt for the Fallen. The other 4 wings have been lost to the mists of time and are no longer fielded by the Angels. They have been unseen since the era of the Horus Heresy. First we have the Death Wing Protocol. The Death Wing originated as the veteran Cataphracti Terminators of the Dark Angels, who often served as lifeguards to the Legion's officers, including the Primarch. Duty weighed heavily upon the oath-bound warriors of the Death Wing, for once sworn to a task, they would let no obstacle bar them from its completion. On the battlefield, not even death would stay their advance, and where others would retreat in the face of annihilation, the Death Wing stood unmoved. When war dictated that the impossible must be achieved, it was the warriors of the Death Wing to which the 1st Legion turned. The Death Wing is unique among the Space Marine chapters of the 41st millennium, in that the entire Dark Angels 1st Company fights exclusively in Terminator armor. The Death Wing are notoriously stubborn and resistant, refusing to buckle under extreme pressure from enemy advances, even when it would be more advantageous to retreat. Yet the Death Wing is not solely a tactical formation. Promotion to it also means that an individual is made privy to many of the chapter's dark secrets. The most closely guarded of these is that of the betrayal of Luther and the Fallen, and the subsequent loss of their Primarch, Lionel Johnson. Then we have the Raven Wing Protocol. The Raven Wing Protocol, which focused on the use of anti-gravitic units and all-terrain bikes, had its origins in early Legiones Astartes tactics for rapid-moving search and destroy formations, some of which dated back to the nomadic techno-barbarian war clans of pre-unification Terra. After Caliban's discovery during the Great Crusade, these formations were revived and expanded. As they offered a form of rapid strike warfare the Knights of Caliban both understood and had perfected over many generations, though now their steeds were ones of unyielding metal rather than flesh. Then, the Dreadwing Protocol. The specialty of the Dreadwing was total warfare using the most sinister of weapons. The elected, voted lieutenant of this wing, bearing the title of Dreadbringer, commanded destroyer squads supported by other types of units to bring total annihilation of a foe on a specific battlefield. The Dreadwing also utilized mass armored assaults of land raiders, Spartan assault tanks, mastodons, and fellblades with advanced weaponry. Their hallmark was the use of dark, sinister, and shunned munitions such as phosphex, rad, and vortex weapons. Then, the Fire Wing Protocol. The Fire Wing was one of the 6 wings of the Hexagrammaton that existed during the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy. The smallest of the wings, the Fire Wing, was dedicated to the hidden subtleties of warfare, and within its ranks were found an eclectic mix of stalkers, champions, and Moritat killers, all bound by their shared expertise in the arts of blade and knife, duelists and assassins without peer. The Firewing sought the destruction of the enemy through the violent depletion of their command structure, whether in honorable duels at the heart of a battle, or at the hands of subtle killers far from the battlefield. When given free rein upon the field of battle, the initiates of the Firewing choose to wage a war of wills against the enemy, seeking to break their resolve rather than slaughter their ranks. The Firewing was disbanded in the wake of the Horus Heresy. There are, however, intriguing heraldic links between the Firewing and the Sigil of the Consecrators, a second founding successor chapter of the Dark Angels. The Iron Wing Protocol. The Iron Wing Protocol was developed before the Great Crusade was fully born, when the first Space Marines were used by the Emperor to exterminate threats to mankind too dire to be allowed to endanger the glorious future. He had designed later variants of this protocol, which sought to wed the superhuman power of the Legiones Astartes and amplify that killing strength with newly designed, bespoke armored units, such as the Land Raider, as well as mighty dreadnoughts in close support, for the Iron Wing's mission required the shock application of brute force. Those were entered into the Principia Bellicosa for use and development by the legions that would follow, notably the 9th and 14th. But the Dark Angels would continue to develop the tactical pattern to serve their own ends. And of course, the Stormwing Protocol. As the largest of all the wings of the Hexagrammaton, the Stormwing incorporated the majority of the Dark Angels' line infantry, training battalions and mobile ordnance batteries within its ranks. The members of this wing were drilled in the disciplined and stalwart arts of close order warfare and set-piece battles, unshakable on defense and resolute on attack. Its veteran warriors were the core of the Legion's infantry companies, capable of executing complex maneuvers and formations under the heaviest enemy fire. The Stormwing was also a tactical formation used in the Great Crusade, consisting exclusively of breacher squads armed with boarding shields. The Stormwing specialized in space-borne boarding operations. The Weapons of Old Night. As the First Legion, the Dark Angels were originally outfitted with a panoply of arms, drawn not from the fruits of the Emperor's pact with Mars, but instead from the arsenal of the Unification Wars of ancient Terra. Relic weapons and technologies of great potency, but often difficult to replicate, and even treacherous to do so, many of which would later be forbidden. Long after the other legions were formed, and the Great Crusade ratified and standardized much of the Legiones Astartes' war gear so that it could be replicated on Forge worlds across the Imperium, the Dark Angels retained many of these ancient and potent relics, as well as the techno-arcana that resided within them. These they continued to employ solely within the Legion, weapons whose secrets were never fully yielded to Mars or their Space Marine brethren by the Emperor's own command. These weapons included the Tyrannic Greatsword, the Calibanite Warblade, the Plasma Repeater, the stasis shield for grenade launchers and missiles, and the molecular acid shells for heavy bolters. There were also some specialized units and formations like the Inner Circle Knights Cenobium. The Dark Angels played host to a multitude of ciphered orders, chambers militant, concealed within the panoply of the Legion, and dedicated to the preservation and perfection of a singular doctrine of war. Within each of these orders, the most dedicated warrior adepts were charged and granted the right to bear the cipher and charge of the order, to fight in the forefront of those battles that required the hard-won skills harbored within each of these secretive cells. We also have the Deathwing Companion Detachment. The finest warriors and longest-serving veterans among the Deathwing formed the ranks of the Companions. Each such detachment sworn by the most stringent of oaths to ensure the survival of those officers placed under their charge. Most famous among the Companions are those that had taken a death blow meant for their charge and survived. Such warriors were granted the right to wear bone-white armor in recognition of their selfless devotion to the Legion. Then the Firewing Enigmatus Cabal. The Firewing existed to prosecute a swift and silent style of war, to smother the enemy's ability to resist, steal their will to fight with precision strikes, and gain the acquisition of key intelligence for use by other forces. The Enigmati were the foremost practitioners of this style of war, operating in small elite units to eliminate the enemy's leaders, disrupt their lines of advance, and throw their plans into disarray. Armed and equipped with the finest weapons and equipment available, they were a deadly threat to those deemed dangerous enough by the Lion to warrant their attention. And the Dreadwing Interemptor. Even among the brethren of the infamous Dreadwing, the Interemptors were a grim breed, dedicated as they were to a single purpose: the utter annihilation of the enemy. When the Interemptors attacked, they left behind no trace of those they conquered, no bodies, no ruins, nothing. They took no trophies of their victories and told no tales of those that had fallen before them. Those consigned to death at their hands were forgotten forever. They were the Lion's ultimate sanction, his final curse for those foolish enough to stand against the First Legion. The Legion Command Hierarchy. Given the multitude of layers of structure to be found in the organization of the Dark Angels, the Legion's command hierarchy can seem impossibly confused to outsiders. The three strands of authority woven into the form of the Legion, that of wing, chapter, and order, which seem to compete to claim each warrior's allegiance and attention upon the field of battle, as well as presenting complex schemes of heraldry that defy easy identification by those unfamiliar with their intricacies. However, for the warriors of the First Legion, it has proven to be not only effective, but also capable of quickly adapting to the flow of battle and the ever-changing vicissitudes of war, allowing it to not only overcome the challenges of the Great Crusade, but to thrive as one of the most dangerous of all the Legiones Astartes. Taken separately, each of these chains of command is actually quite traditional in form, based upon the precepts of the Principia Bellicosa, which the First Legion helped define, with authority invested in a single chain of command, from the highest ranks down to each individual of the companies, orders, and wings that made up the Legion. This allowed commanders to efficiently maintain control of large bodies of troops by dividing the responsibility among a multitude of lesser officers, while staying true to the vision and strategy of a single general. What complicated this arrangement was that to outsiders, it seemed that the three different strands of authority within the Legion were not linked, and left no standing and fixed method by which one could tell when the authority of one commander outstripped that of another. To the warriors of the Dark Angels, it came down to a simple matter of battlefield context and a deep-seated trust and respect for the abilities of the warriors that stood alongside them. In battle, authority was ceded to the warriors of the highest rank in whichever branch of the Legion was best suited to exploit the situation around them. Where the specialized knowledge and skills of a given wing or order officer would provide the Legion an advantage, their authority superseded that of the more traditional commanders, with both the rank and file and the line officers implicitly trusting them to lead the fight. When the veterans of wing and order moved to implement the overall strategies of the chapter commanders, the warriors around them followed. Such a disregard for strict and unchanging lines of command and control frustrated some legions and primarchs, with Robert Guilliman in particular making many attempts to convince the Lion to reform his legion along the lines of his own Codex Astartes. Some attempts by other legions were made to emulate the success of the Dark Angels pattern, with the Raven Guard applying a similar structure to separate certain strata of their legion. However, none of the other legions retained the solid core of long-standing veterans required to fully implement the complex organizational doctrines of the First Legion. Just as it had been intended, they took from the example of the first those elements of their tactics that meshed with the direction of their own legion and adapted them to their own purposes. It was only the superb skills and long-term indoctrination and familiarity of the warriors of the Dark Angels that could fully utilize such a complex organizational arrangement to its fullest potential. It allowed them to adapt and evolve from moment to moment on the battlefield, claiming victory without the grinding attrition that marked the conquests of other, more inflexible legions. Outside of the battlefield authority of individual knight praetors or order preceptors, there were three bodies that exerted control over the strategic deployment of the Legion. Foremost among these was the Primarch Lionel Johnson, of course, who held the ranks of Lord of the First Legion, Grand Master of the Hexagrammaton, and High Preceptor of the Hecatonistica. He held absolute and final authority over the entire Legion, and when he took the field, his orders superseded all others, regardless of position or knowledge. Given the known tendency of the Lion to engage in frontline control of smaller battle forces and leave the wildly flung elements of his legion to complete their objectives as they saw fit, much scope existed within the Legion for secondary forms of control to handle the more mundane administration of the massed forces of the Legion. Fortunately, the Dark Angels were both more than capable of operating without direct oversight, having proved their mettle in standard centuries of independent operation, and already possessed additional bodies of authority well suited to directing the arduous task of seeing the far-flung fleets of the Angels supplied. The Council of Masters, comprised of the heads of the wings of the Hexagrammaton or their appointed agents, had long overseen the strategic operation of the Legion. The assembled masters or voted lieutenants were often integral in the process of assigning First Legion forces to the various fleets and war zones of the Great Crusade, and there was often much lively debate within the council halls as to which wing should provide troops and commanders to which deployments. As some of the most experienced and veteran warriors of the Legion, the wingmasters and their marshals were ideally suited to such high-level planning, and the Primarch granted them the honor of his implicit trust, freeing him to undertake a more active role in the Legion. The conclave of preceptors of the Hecatonistica rarely took on a similar role, for although it consisted of warriors of equal skill and experience, it was convened in full on only a few ceremonial occasions. The preceptors of the orders took on strategic leadership roles largely only when their specialist skills were demanded by the conflict at hand, but still served as a reserve of talented officers should the Legion ever stand in need of direction. This layered system of leadership, from Primarch to the Council of Masters to the conclave of preceptors and then individual officers of the line, was flexible enough to support the Legion's preference for a multitude of simultaneous deployments rather than massing in a single war zone. It played to the strengths of their Primarch, who had little interest in the micromanagement of his Legion's strategies and excelled in direct battlefield command. That the Lion made few changes to this existing structure after taking over command of the Legion speaks of his approval of it, and that he granted such autonomy to his warriors shows the trust he had for the veterans of the First Legion. Lords of the Inner and Outer Circles. Given the unique structure of their organization among the Space Marine Legions, it was not surprising that the Dark Angels also employed a number of variant titles for their officers. The line officers of the Legion retained a standard pattern of identification prior to the Calibanite influence that Lionel Johnson brought to the First Legion, though in the years after the Primarch's return, a variant system based on the titles of the Knights of Caliban found favor with many. By the outbreak of the Horus Heresy, only the most intransigent veterans of the old Legion, those of Terra, Grammari, and beyond, still used the older, more plain titles of Praetor, Centurion, and Consul. The warriors of the wings of the Hexagrammaton adhered to their own system of titles, denoting both the bearer's authority and skill within the wing to which he belonged. This system was in use with all 6 of the wings in existence at the time of the Heresy, with few variances between them. Some employed distinct honorary titles to distinguish warriors of particular renown, such as the title of Eschaton, which was used within the Dreadwing to denote a warrior who had overseen the final death of an entire Xenos race or world. By contrast, the secretive orders of the Hecatonistica maintained few set titles across the hundreds of individual orders that existed in the pre-Heresy Legion. Of the few titles used by almost every order, the most well-known were that of Preceptor, used to indicate the leader of an order, and Seneschal, which was granted to high-ranking order members that oversaw the hidden chambers of the halls of the order. When openly garbed in the full panoply of the Order and bound to open war in the name of the Legion, members would also use the honorary title Cenobite to illustrate the temporary supremacy of their standing in the Order over that of their rank within the formal hierarchy of the Legion. What follows is a brief summary of the more commonly known and used titles and ranks for the 3 chambers of the pre-Heresy First Legion, ranked from highest to lowest. First we have the Hecatonistica, or Corpus Sinister, the Preceptor, the Seneschal, the Cenobite, and the Adept. Then the Principia Bellicosa, or Corpus Nobilis, the Knight Praetor, the Knight Commander, the Knight Captain, and the Knight. And then the Hexagrammaton, or Corpus Dextera, the Master, or Voted Lieutenant, Marshal, then Proctor, and then Initiate. The Legion Operational Doctrine. By the last years of the Great Crusade, shortly before the outbreak of the Horus Heresy, the Dark Angels claimed a strength of approximately 180,000 warriors. In terms of sheer size, this placed them in the upper tier of the Legiones Astartes, alongside such legions as the Ultramarines and the Sons of Horus, and despite the rise of the younger legions to rival their glory, they still remained one of the single most powerful military forces in the Imperium. Some surviving records from the period have noted a much lower field strength for the Dark Angels, sometimes as low as 50,000. These reports are likely due to confusion that the Dark Angels' organizational procedures and heraldry caused for most unfamiliar observers. The dense nature of the ciphers they use and the secretive nature of many of its sub-formations often led to some amount of bewilderment for outsiders, especially when combined with the fluid and shifting nature of authority and command within the Legion, sometimes even to the degree that it led to military setbacks when working alongside other Imperial forces. Surprisingly, the Dark Angels made little attempt to remedy this situation. Indeed, some of their commanders, especially the older veterans of the Great Crusade, seemed to take a quiet pride in the confusion it occasioned among the least disciplined of their allies. In particular, a common practice by some Dark Angels Legion forces was to arrive without announcing to their allies who commanded the First Legion's contingent, leaving their counterparts to determine whom to greet as warlord by the heraldry they displayed. Those few who made the correct choice or who were wary enough to make no judgment were treated with respect, and those who chose poorly were watched carefully for further lapses in judgment. Such tests of worth were commonplace among the Dark Angels, both for their own initiates and for those that would fight alongside them, for the Sons of the Lion judged the worth of no warrior on rumor and hearsay alone. Such actions were most often encountered among the more veteran formations of the Legion, those forces whose tallies of victories and vanquished foes were so impressive that some among the newly recruited regiments of the Imperium's armies thought them fabrications, and even those who had served in the Great Crusade long enough to have heard of the valor of the First Legion rarely knew the full scope of their victories and sacrifices. Indeed, the Dark Angels remained one of the most experienced bodies of warriors within the Legiones Astartes. Despite the many dire battles they had faced, they had always retained a core of veterans to pass on the hard-won skills and knowledge of their struggles. Indeed, much of the structure of the wings of the Hexagrammaton and the orders of the Hecatonistica was dedicated to exactly this task. As such, they had maintained a level of skill and proficiency in every sphere of warfare that, while sometimes less specialized than the younger legions, could rarely be equaled among the Legiones Astartes. Given these material and organizational preferences, the Dark Angels tended to a sparse pattern of deployment, scattering their numbers wildly in relatively small detachments, relying more on the potency of their weaponry and the individual prowess of their warriors than on sheer numbers. Capitalizing on the diverse nature of the warriors that made up each chapter and company, individual battle forces of the Dark Angels were most often little more than a handful of chapters operating in close support, often a force as small as a few thousand warriors. Where other fleets relied more on the numbers they could bring to bear, the Dark Angels emphasized the fluid nature of their units, which were able to quickly and efficiently reform as needed within a local theater of war in order to meet the challenges of a given engagement. It was a rare sight to see large numbers of the First Legion gathered in any one place, and such a sight was considered a portent of the worst kind, for the grim, black-armored ranks of the Dark Angels were only amassed to face the most dire of threats. Indeed, many among the ranks of the Imperial army considered it a grave misfortune to be tasked with serving as support to the Dark Angels, not due to any mistreatment at the hands of the Legiones Astartes, but rather because the battlefields upon which they walked were inimical to the lives of merely mortal warriors, and only the most skilled or fortunate mortal soldiers survived such a tour of duty. Despite this long-held superstition, those few regiments that had served alongside the Angels and survived held the battle honors granted them by the Lion with pride, despite the bloody price paid for their acquisition. In order to support this wildly spread web of independent companies and chapters, the Dark Angels maintained perhaps the greatest fleet of all the Legiones Astartes, both in terms of sheer number of capital-class vessels and in the impressive firepower of those craft. Just as with the many disparate companies of the Legion, the fleet was also widely spread, most often operating either as a support flotilla attached to a chapter or as one of the rare deep-range patrol squadrons. Support flotilla were comprised of the heaviest void ships available, with the core of many being a Gloriana-class battleship or other first-rate warship, supported by one or more squadrons of cruisers. Support flotilla were intended to provide transport for the attached chapters, allowing them to breach heavily defended star systems without support and assault a specified target without the need for extensive auxiliary forces. They also served to provide orbital fire support to Legiones Astartes forces engaged in battle and the base for Legion interface craft, either to serve as an orbital supply line or to launch airstrikes or interdiction missions. By contrast, the patrol fleets maintained a smaller contingent of Legion warriors, rarely more than company strength, and fielded more deep-range cruisers and sleek escort craft mounting scanning augurs and other equipment unique to the Dark Angels. These squadrons were tasked with seeking out unknown nests of Xenos or isolationist and belligerent human enclaves, much in the same manner as the more specialized White Scars fleets. Those Legiones Astartes companies accompanying the fleet were used solely to assess the threat level of the enemies discovered, mounting spoiling raids or brief hit-and-run campaigns before withdrawing back to the orbital fortresses. Those deemed dangerous by the veterans of the First Legion were annihilated from orbit, and those marked vulnerable left for the Great Crusade that followed in the fleet's wake. With assets spread across the galaxy, the First Legion placed little emphasis on maintaining a large number of holdings and fortresses. Indeed, there are only two large outposts held by them: the ancient fortress of Grammari, which played host to the halls of the Council of Masters, and the vast industrial facilities that produced many of the Legion's more esoteric weapons and had long been concealed from the scrutiny of the Mechanicum, and the more recently acquired fortress monastery of the Order on Caliban. These two worlds saw the largest concentration of the Legion's infrastructure and were both heavily fortified and defended. Other holdings on Terra, where a significant portion of the First Legion's recruitment was still conducted, and the scattered chantry houses of the various orders militant, were less well defended, but not intended as front-line combat installations. The standard pattern of operations within the Legion saw these holdings used as bases for resupply for a force that was primarily based within the mobile halls of the fleet. Only on the rarest of occasions did any of the chapters of the Dark Angels Legion return to their halls for any lengthy period of rest, with garrison duty left to the rawest recruits and those masters and seneschals with Deathwing lifeguard cadres that stood warden over those domains. The Forbidden Arsenal of the Dark Angels. Complementing the Dark Angels Legion's skill and hard-won knowledge was one of the most deadly arsenals in the entire early Imperium. Much of the technology routinely deployed by the Angels was of an order of complexity beyond that available to the younger Space Marine legions, and on par with those of the Legio Custodes, produced in dedicated manufactoria on Terra and elsewhere to the specifications of the Dark Angels' learned forge masters, according to designs dating back millennia to the age of technology. Exotic plasma weaponry, munitions of archaic and unstable design, as well as variants of armored vehicles and voidcraft based on unique technologies, all were the sole province of the First Legion. This proved a potent force multiplier on the battlefields of the Great Crusade, amplifying the superior skills of the Dark Angels and allowing them to prevail against foes that lesser technology could not defeat. As well as those advanced weapons and designs they used openly, the Angels also maintained large stocks of weapons of a darker renown within the sealed vaults of Caliban and Gramarye, as well as a number of secret caches scattered across the Imperium and guarded by dedicated orders of the Hecatonistica, were vast stores of weaponry long since prescribed by the Emperor to the other military arms of the Imperium. Gene phages capable of annihilating all life upon a planetary body in mere solar hours, core-breaching magna munitions that could tear a planet apart from within, stockpiles of ancient silica virae, the dreaded scourge of the nanite that was pronounced the ultimate tech heresy by the Mechanicum of Mars, all could be found within the hidden armories of the Dark Angels. Such weapons could not be unleashed lightly, for they served only a single purpose, the utter eradication of all life. They were of no use to conquerors, only to destroyers, and they served as the ultimate sanction for those enemies like the Rangda, deserving only of complete annihilation. The Legion's strength and disposition. Horus chose the moment to raise his banner carefully, setting plans to have those Space Marine legions that threatened his revolt divided and distant from the fighting that would decide the fate of the Imperium. The Dark Angels, ever on the move and split across the vast territory of the Imperium, had been subtly divided by the orders of the new War Master, set to patrols and campaigns far from Terra and cleared away from the northern bounds of the Emperor's domains. A significant portion of the Legion had gathered under Lionel Johnson and been dispatched beyond the bounds of the Imperium in the galactic east, beyond news of what was to come and far from those who might call upon them for aid. Both Caliban and Gramarye had seen a sudden drop in shipments of crucial supplies and news from the far front of the Great Crusade, all blamed on the vicissitudes of war, rather than the hidden orders of the War Master, leaving them gradually more isolated and vulnerable. To any conventional assessment of military strength, the Dark Angels had been forced into a corner before even the first traitor cannon was fired at Istvan III. Of their full strength, most likely somewhere slightly less than 200,000 warriors at about 180,000, no more than a third had been dispatched along the line and placed beyond the reach of the Imperium. This left perhaps 120,000 Dark Angels active along the borders of the Imperium, mostly clustered to the galactic south and west, in small battle forces of no more than 5,000 warriors. Most of these forces were either heavily engaged in prosecuting difficult campaigns or fresh from the fields of victory and still counting the toll upon their strength. Few had been given the opportunity to make contact with either the upper echelons of their own legion's command or that of the Divisio Militaris, that coordinated Great Crusade deployments, and the Primarch Lionel Johnson remained far from the reach of his legion, with no news of his progress or the fate of the troops that accompanied him. The Dark Angels that remained were in essence blinded, and by accepted military logic, exhausted, and as such Horus, his strategists and co-conspirators deemed such small forces to be of negligible threat to their plans, that isolated from any central command, they would be unable to mount any real opposition to the rebellion. They were, of course, sorely mistaken. Among all the legions, the Dark Angels' complex system of wings and orders had long defied any foothold to Horus's and Lorgar's treacherous warrior lodges, denying that insidious seed of chaos corruption that had stymied so many other legions' ability to react swiftly to the news of Horus's perfidy. Nor were the Dark Angels distracted by the confusion that afflicted the Imperium's control channels in the immediate aftermath of the Istvan III revolt, for they had long disdained to subject themselves to the direct oversight of the Imperium's authorities, where other legions and fleets scrambled to react to the unified onslaught of the traitor forces and struggle to combat the influence of the War Master within their own ranks. The Dark Angels' fleet each took initiative on their own and met this new challenge head-on. Purposefully kept to the outskirts of the initial conflict by the War Master's machinations, the Dark Angels' Knight Praetors set their chapters upon those outlying worlds that dared to openly espouse loyalty to the War Master, deprived of the chance to directly strike against Horus's new centers of power. The Angels turned their disadvantage to opportunity, each fleet an unpredictable threat to the traitors and their allies, and more than capable of annihilating forces larger than their limited numbers might suggest. The destruction and chaos they wrought kept many star systems and industrial centers along the southern and western galactic rims from supplying the main rebel force, as well as threatening the Death Guard homeworld of Barbarus and slowing the rate of troops from that key world to the front. Even as the hastily assembled Imperial Retaliatory Task Force headed to Istvan V, the Dark Angels were fully engaged at a dozen worlds far from Terra, utilizing the Terra weapons at their disposal to make examples of those Imperial worlds most vocal in their support of the War Master. The burned and poisoned husks of once populous worlds were intended to bring a swift end to any insurrection, but could not stem the tide of rebellion that rose up in the wake of the Dropside massacre at Istvan V and the momentum it granted to the rebel armies of the War Master. Despite this, the Dark Angels did not hesitate to destroy that which they could not hold in the Emperor's name, preferring to leave Horus as the War Master of an empire of ashes than allow their temporary weakness to cede him territory, with only the most heavily fortified worlds proof against their onslaught. So, for the first handful of years of the Horus Heresy, the limited size of the Dark Angels' companies restricted them to small-scale raids, with many using the superior voidcraft of their attached fleets to take on the role of commerce raiders, cutting the throat of the traitors' supply chain. Gramarye and Caliban, while never directly attacked, were kept isolated from the greater war, both by the actions of word-bearers Esoteris and the strange warp-based powers they now wielded, and the disturbing silence from certain echelons of the Legion's leadership. The Dark Angels remained a potent force, but one divided and bereft of cohesive direction, at the time seemingly little more than a painful thorn in the side of the juggernaut Horus had aimed at Terra. Yet, with the advantage of hindsight, It is clear that by the actions of the raiding fleets of the First Legion, Horus was denied the early victory he craved, for the supplies they denied him and the chaos they sowed amid sectors that might otherwise have fallen to him without a shot fired slowed his advance just enough. The stubborn refusal of the Dark Angels to consolidate and grant Horus's lackeys a final decisive battle, a defiant and suicidal assault to express their anger and frustration, granted the Primarch Rogel Dawn, the Praetorian of Terra, time to rally the remaining loyalist elements around the Imperium's core. It also kept them from the series of massacres and last stands that plagued the loyalists during the early years of the Horus Heresy, the carefully arranged decimation by which Horus had removed those obstacles that stood in his way. This carefully chosen strategy left the Dark Angels perfectly placed for the return of their lord, poised at the borders of Horus's fragile empire and ready for the lion to give the word, to let loose the fetters of imperial decree and give them leave to unleash all the fell tools they held ready for such a cataclysm. Horus's first gambit had failed. Terror remained outside his grasp, and the First Legion stood ready to show him the terrible cost of his dark ambitions. Chapter Organization. Following the tragic events of the Horus Heresy, the Dark Angels began acting suspiciously and growing more insular, which was noted by many watchful eyes. Having incorporated the structure of the original order on Caliban into the Legion, the remaining Dark Angels took that knightly brotherhood a step further, becoming even more monastic in manner. The Dark Angels sought to lay down the new rigors that would govern them in the wake of the terrible events that had led to the fall of Caliban. At this time in the early 31st millennium, entire new divisions of the Imperium, such as the Inquisition, were developed with the sole purpose of seeking out and destroying internal corruption related to the treachery of the Horus Heresy and the actions of chaos on the human-settled worlds of the Imperium. Inspections following the destruction of Caliban judged the Dark Angels fit to continue as a loyalist legion. Some leeway for their new reclusive behavior was granted due to the simultaneous loss of the Legion's Primarch and homeworld, but largely it was allowed because of the Dark Angels' ongoing and relentless heroics against the Imperium's foes during the travails of the Great Scouring. Regardless of these allowances, the Dark Angels remain closely monitored by the Imperial authorities, and particularly by the nascent Inquisition. After the disappearance of their Primarch, it did not seem that strange for the remaining angels to withdraw further into their own brotherhood. If before they had been described as reserved, now they were, at best, taciturn, at worst, they were cold and austere. Behavior that once would have been described as pensive was now more like a brooding silence. Yet there was one thing that had not changed. Their campaigns continued to be well-planned and effective actions. If the Dark Angels were in some strange mourning, it in no way dampened their ability to bring battle to the enemies of the Imperium and of mankind. Many changes happened within the Imperium during those dark days. Although Horus had been defeated at the Siege of Terra and his remaining traitor legions driven into the Eye of Terra, the High Lords of Terra and the remaining loyalist Primarchs still dreaded the resurgence of chaos. They had all recoiled in horror at the full realization of how insidious the betrayal had been, how far across the galaxy the roots of corruption had spread. Never again could the Imperium be subjected to such widespread rebellion. Drastic measures had to be undertaken. To avoid the threats of the Space Marine legions falling under the influence of the archenemy, the remaining legions were subdivided into a number of smaller chapters. Under the new structure of this so-called second founding, each chapter's size was limited to 1,000 warriors. The organization, tactics, and roles of these new chapters, a word derived from the former primary subdivision of a full legion under the strictures of the Principia Bellicosa, were defined in a hugely influential work known as the Codex Astartes. Robert Guilliman, the Primarch of the Ultramarines who had become the Lord Commander of the Imperium and the Imperial Regent in the wake of Malcador the Sigillite's death and the Emperor's internment in the Golden Throne, almost single-handedly undertook the work of preparing the Codex Astartes. The prescriptions within its pages not only lessened the risks of a single traitor altering the course of the Imperium, but also allowed the limited number of loyalist Space Marines remaining to be more flexible, spreading more widely across the galaxy to confront mankind's many enemies. The organization of the Dark Angels chapter and its unforgiven successors differs from the standards of the Codex Astartes in the shape of its higher ranks, along with the order of battle of its first and second companies, which were the only survivors of the wings of the Hexagrammaton. The Inner Circle. After the destruction of Caliban, the senior members of the First Legion assembled in secret conclave. They decreed that knowledge of the fall from grace of their brothers must remain undisclosed for all time, and that no outsider must ever learn of the schism that had split the Legion, or that some Space Marines of the Dark Angels Legion had turned to the ruinous powers like the Astartes of the traitor legions. Should this dreadful truth ever become known, they feared that the Dark Angels would come to be reviled as traitors like those who had followed Horus, and all hope of expunging the stain to their honor in the Emperor's eyes would be lost forever. As the decades following the fall of Caliban turned to centuries, the Inner Circle took shape. It grew from an ad hoc conclave into a formal, if still furtive, organization that spread through not just the Dark Angels, but their successor chapters as well. Recruitment planets were founded, and new generations of the Dark Angels were added, replacing the ranks of those lost in battle. The regiments and drills of the chapter were strict, with special emphasis on brotherhood and loyalty. However, the masters and elder warriors who led the instruction told the neophytes nothing of the sins of their forefathers. The truth of what occurred and knowledge of the fallen was withheld, now known only to the increasingly small number of brethren who had survived it. The Inner Circle was comprised of the Legion's most senior officers, formed to forever guard this dangerous knowledge, and each member swore oaths of unspeakable secrecy. The Inner Circle is currently comprised of the Dark Angels chapter's Supreme Grand Master, all of the other Grand Masters, the masters of each of the chapter's companies, the members of the Death Wing, and the Raven Wing Black Knights. However, even the members of the Inner Circle receive gradations of the truth, and only the Supreme Grand Master of the chapter is currently privy to all of the Dark Angels' many secrets. The Grand Masters of the Inner Circle swore that so long as even one of the traitor fallen angels remained alive and unrepentant, the Dark Angels would bear the stigma of the unforgiven, cursed by their own brothers to atone for all eternity for the sins of the past. Until every last fallen Dark Angel was captured and made to repent, there could be no peace for those sons of the Lion who had remained true to their duty. This would be the true mission of the Inner Circle and, through its secretive machinations, of the entire chapter. The Inner Circle hides its true face even from its own. Where many Space Marine chapters openly celebrate their ancestors' achievements, the Dark Angels take great pains to tell their story one passage at a time. Much of their teachings to their brethren on this subject are shrouded in allegory, parable, and myth, the same essential truths told again and again in one form after another. As veterans rise through the unseen levels of trust, more of the truth is gradually revealed to them by the ranking members of the inner circle. The first such allegory a Dark Angel is told recounts the so-called Tale of Two Heads Talking, in which a band of Deathwing Terminators return to the planet of their birth to find their people enslaved by hideous Xenos overlords. Daubing their armor white, as was the tradition of their native people, the Terminators began their death quest. They defeated their enemy, but at the cost of the life of their beloved librarian. Similar tales are told at every stage in a Dark Angel's progression through the ranks, the details changing from one story to the next, but the essential truth remains. Each tells of a group of heroes returning to their homeworld to find their people enthralled by a traitor, and only at the cost of eternal humiliation and dishonor are the enemies defeated. Even then, some always escape, to be hunted down later. Only on his ascension to the elite First Company, known within the Dark Angels chapter as the Death Wing, will a battle brother of the Dark Angels or the other Unforgiven chapters begin to learn the truth of the events that transpired at the very dawn of the Age of the Imperium. This is the first ring of trust within the inner circle, and those who are considered for membership are observed, unaware by those within the Hidden Order and also by the diminutive watchers in the dark, the mysterious humanoid creatures that haunt the lower levels of the rock. It is essential that only those who have proven their loyalty to the chapter time and time again across the decades are allowed to progress. Silent and hooded brothers lead any aspirants before the assembled inner circle for the great rituals of judgment, and those chosen are elevated to the Death Wing or disappear forever, further casualties of the Unforgiven shame. While a new member of the inner circle might suppose he has now been told the whole truth about his chapter, such is not the case. There remain circles within circles, levels within levels, with each step accompanied by its own rituals. Entering the First Company is only the beginning of a Dark Angel's journey towards the truth. Rising through the intricate and convoluted ranks of the inner circle, he learns more and more, the secrets one by one revealed as his master's trust in him increases. Only upon ascension to the rank of Grand Master, leader of an entire specialty of the chapter, is the whole truth revealed, and even then, it is likely that there remain revelations known only to the holder of the title of Supreme Grand Master, the chapter master of the Dark Angels. Given the planning skills inherited from their Primarch, the Angels have instituted fail-safe systems that automate the passing on of knowledge should key members of the inner circle die without being able to properly reveal their secrets to their successors. There are some revelations that are known only to those who gain ascension to the rank of Supreme Grand Master, and yet there remain secrets of the chapter to which even he is not privy. The next category of squads are called the Close Support Squads. Nothing can end a battle as quickly as a well-coordinated and perfectly timed assault. It is the role of the Close Support Squads to crack open the enemy lines and to deliver the blow that breaks them entirely, sending the remnants of their army fleeing. To make such attacks, the designated troops must be fast, aggressive, and hard-hitting. These squads include the following. First, the Inceptor Squads. These Primaris Space Marines are equipped with reinforced Mark 10 Gravis power armor and heavy built-in jump packs, rocket-like thrusters worn upon the back that allow their wearers to make powered jumps across the battlefield, leaping over obstacles and hurtling over great distances at speed. These fast-moving squads are capable of descending into the midst of the enemy and unleashing an absolute shell storm. The primary weapon of the Inceptor Squad is the Assault Bolter. A single such firearm can stitch a pattern of death to skith down multiple targets in seconds, and each member of the squad bears a pair of these bulky weapons. This means that the Inceptor Squads are capable of putting out enough firepower to halt a charging mob of orcs, or to turn massed cultists into a bloody mist. The distinctive sound of their high-caliber shots is swiftly answered by rippling explosions of bolt shells and the dying screams of their enemies. Alternatively, an Inceptor Squad may be equipped with plasma exterminators, a loadout favored by the chapters of the Unforgiven due to their affinity with the dangerous and powerful technology behind their creation. Inceptors can be dropped from attack craft, even those in low orbit. Engaging their jump packs, they enter the atmosphere of a planet at blazing speeds, moving so quickly that few foes can react to their approach. Even as the enemy's guns try to track them, the Inceptors are upon them, a devastating spearhead that strikes at the fore of a Space Marine assault. Despite the ground-shaking force with which they land, the Inceptors' servo-equipped boots absorb all of the impact, as well as providing extra boost when their wearers launch themselves back into the skies with a bounding leap. Formidable on their own, Inceptor Squads are the perfect complement to the rapid strike style of the Space Marines. Next, the Assault Squads. With chainswords roaring and bolt pistols blazing, the Assault Squads of the Dark Angels charge into the thick of battle. They're often unleashed as the vanguard of an attack, for it is their violent onset that will punch the holes in the enemy lines that will be exploited by their brothers in other squads. As Assault Squads carry little in the way of ranged weaponry, it is vital for them to close with a foe quickly. To this end, they frequently employ jump packs, allowing them to quickly cover great distances and deploy from Thunderhawk gunships, descending out of the skies like birds of prey. Plunging deep behind enemy lines, they can bypass a foe's best-laid defenses, as shown when the assault squads of the Dark Angels' 4th Company forced a breach in the Gohika line during the siege against the Iron Warriors of Perdicia. Such dangerous deployments take a toll, however, and of all the Dark Angels, only the Ravenwing regularly sustains a higher casualty rate than the assault squads of the battle companies. Unlike the bellicose and headstrong assault squads of other Space Marine chapters, those of the Dark Angels are dour and stoic. In place of howled battle cries, they maintain a constant chant, a mantra of hatred and repugnance, every bit as terrifying as the vox-amplified bellows of their counterparts in other chapters. Then we have the Assault Intercessor. Assault Intercessors are Primaris Space Marines who are among the most widespread close support units in a Space Marine chapter's arsenal. Firing their heavy bolt pistols as they close upon the foe, they charge into the fray, where they make short work of their enemies with brutal swings of their chainswords. Then the Outrider. An Outrider is a Primaris Space Marine who rides to battle on a Raider-pattern combat bike. Outrider squads advance ahead of the main Space Marine lines, guard the flanks of larger formations, and hunt down enemy infiltrators to the Adeptus Astartes' battle lines. When battle is joined, they conduct lightning-fast hit-and-run attacks on defended positions and run down those who would try to escape the vengeance of the chapter. The Raider combat bike, designed like most of the vehicles and war gear used by the Primaris Marines by Archmagos Dominus Belisarius Call, shares a lot of similarities with the standard Space Marine assault bike, including a twin-linked bolter weapon, loadout, and double exhausts. However, the engine block is even more heavily armored, and the front suspension has undergone quite an evolution. While speed, weapons, and armor are certainly important for a combat bike, they are nothing when compared with performance. The Raider pattern combat bike is also excellent on the battlefield as long as its rider can dominate its bellicose machine spirit. With Battle Brother and bike in harmony, victory is all but assured. Among the Dark Angels, Outriders usually serve with the Raven Wing. Then, the Reaver Squads. Even amongst the grim and shadowed brethren of the Dark Angels, the Reaver Squads are regarded as the most sinister squads within the chapter. Here are terror troops, trained and equipped so that their sudden appearance spreads fear up and down the enemy lines. Each member of this Primaris squad is outfitted in Mark 10 Phobos power armor, constructed from a lighter weight ceramite that allows its wearer greater mobility and stealth. The suit's servo motors are engineered for silent running, as Reaver squads rely upon infiltration and secrecy to launch their shock attacks. The element of surprise is key to any Reaver squad, and they employ a host of different methods to ensure they can ghost through enemy lines to appear wherever on the battlefield they can inflict the most damage. Some Reavers are equipped with grav chutes, allowing them to be airdropped into combat from fast-moving transport or attack craft. Using directional fins, Reavers control their plummet, pulling out of steep descents only at the last instant. Their streamlined armor has been designed to dampen both noise and resistance as they freefall into battle, and there is no sign of their arrival like the fiery contrails of jump packs or the flashing glare of teleportation. Once they reach their destination, the Reavers join the fray. Not all of their squads deploy by air, however. Many simply move unnoticed across the battlefield to get into position, auto sensors set to maximum as they attempt to stay out of their foe's vision. To this end, Reavers often go to war bearing silent firing grapnel launchers, allowing them to ascend vertical surfaces with ease. They are masters of traveling by unexpected routes, creeping through drainage tunnels or scaling seemingly impossible heights. There is no sight upon a battlefield that they cannot reach. Once in position, they will wait for a prearranged signal, or until an opportune moment arises. Nothing can prepare a foe, even one standing guard, for the sudden fury and shock of a Reaver assault. It is their role to sow fear and confusion amongst the enemy forces, and so they will emerge from the shadows amidst the blaring of their concussive shock grenades. Gone are their silent ways, replaced with a cacophony. Even the Reavers' quick-firing bolt carbines are modified to add to this effect, the weapon's wave-amplified muzzle blasts roaring. The augmented battle cries of the Reavers themselves are the most terrifying sound of all, and even professional soldiers accustomed to the brutality of war are unnerved by the sudden and horrific oral assault. Against weaker-willed or less trained foes, the results are even more dramatic. The Unforgiven chapters have all fielded Reaver squads to some degree, for their shock tactics and surprise attacks are ideal at laying the groundwork for the killing blows that follow. Even as enemies reel from the Reavers' assaults, the bikes and aircraft of the Second Company suddenly appear, swiftly followed by the teleportation strikes of the First Company Terminators. And at last we have the Incursor squads. An Incursor squad is a close support Primaris Space Marine unit that fulfills an aggressive close-quarters gun-fighting role within Adeptus Astartes forces. Their missions typically see them storming defended positions, sweeping the flanks of spearhead advances, or rapidly knocking out strategic enemy assets such as power generatoriums and communication centers. Key to this role are the paired wargear technologies of the Oculus Bold carbines and the Divinator-class auspexes that feed directly into their highly advanced transspectral combat visors. The Fire Support Squads. Without the aid of the Fire Support Squads, most Space Marine strike forces would swiftly grind to a halt. These units provide covering fire for their battle line and close support brethren, allowing them to better carry out their vital roles, while thinning out the enemy's infantry and eliminating their toughest armored threats. First up we have the Hellblaster Squads. The Hellblaster Squads harken back to days of glorious legend, when entire squads of the First Legion marched to war bearing deadly plasma weaponry. Each member of a Hellblaster squad bears some variant of the Plasma Incinerator, a weapon whose fire burns with the heat of the sun. Deployed at the right place and time, such a squad can crack open an enemy battle line, blunt a foe's armored spearhead, or fell the most hulking of Xenos creatures. Not even the thickest armor plating can withstand such tremendous plasma blasts for long. Although all members of Hellblaster squads bear some form of a plasma incinerator, they are nonetheless strategically versatile. The assault variant sacrifices a little range for its ability to fire multiple blasts. Both it and the standard plasma incinerator are light enough to be fired on the move, while retaining enough stopping power to turn a green-skinned mob of killer cans into glowing heaps of molten slag. The most powerful version of the armament is the heavy plasma incinerator, which can fire at longer range, and its incandescent bolts of plasma strike with more power still. A Hellblaster with such a weapon must remain stationary if they wish to direct the formidable shot, but is able to hunt larger prey. All variants of the plasma incinerator can be supercharged. With a blazing roar, each weapon glows dangerously hot before discharging plasma bolts of extraordinary force. Typically, this is done only in the direst of circumstances. Like all Imperial plasma armaments, the weapons suffer from potential meltdown when set in this manner. While the Unforgiven are not afraid to martyr themselves in a star burst of self-immolation, they will only do so if such an act is justified by the situation at hand. As they have done since they first claimed the Rock as their homeworld, the Dark Angels honor those brethren who suffer a fiery death due to plasma overloads. Their names are chiseled into the pillars of conflagratus that line the Hall of Fire. They stand as a hallowed and eternal reminder to the living that no cost is too high to pay for victory. Then, the Devastator Squads. The members of a Devastator Squad are the most heavily armed of all Dark Angel Space Marines. Enemy battle tanks are reduced to blazing wrecks before them, while towering walkers are blasted apart by their overwhelming firestorm. In addition to targeting armored vehicles and providing support to advancing battle line or close support troops, Devastator squads are ideal for cracking open enemy fortifications. A Devastator squad commonly carries 4 heavy weapons, the exact nature of which varies from engagement to engagement, with anti-tank las cannons and multi-melters exchanged for infantry shredding heavy bolters and plasma cannons, as the battle requires. Traditionally, a Devastator squad will wield a mix of weaponry in order to more readily adapt to the battle's challenges. though some commanders prefer a homogeneous weapons loadout, purposefully equipping their Devastator squads to compensate for shortfalls elsewhere in the strike force. Any Devastator battle brothers not equipped with heavy weaponry carry bolt guns, acting as spotters and providing covering fire, making their squad in essence a heavy tactical squad that is capable of dealing with a variety of threats. A Devastator squad is at its deadliest when it can fight from a defensible position that overlooks the battlefield. Once entrenched in such a site, they can dominate the foe, forcing them to either keep their heads down or be destroyed. A situation that allows the Dark Angels to seize the initiative. Next, the Aggressor Squads. Advance and destroy is the directive that the Unforgiven chapters have put in place for their Aggressor Squads. Each of these Primaris Marines is clad in heavy Mark 10 Gravis power armor and equipped with a pair of gauntlet-mounted weapons, turning them into a walking bastion of firepower. An aggressor squad can wade into the largest of enemy hordes, plug breaches in defensive lines, or lead the advance across open terrain. During the battles upon Mordian, the Dark Angels' aggressor squads were pivotal in clearing the dense hive cities of foes, leading a slow but inexorable advance hab block by hab block. Aggressor squads have proven effective in many different deployment positions, although one of the most common is advancing between two formations of intercessors. Armed with bolt storm gauntlets, an aggressor squad can spray wide volleys of explosive bolts, mowing down waves of enemy infantry. Back-mounted frag storm grenade launchers add to the carnage, blasting holes into oncoming formations with great blossoms of shrapnel-filled explosives. Should any foes live through such a hurricane of firepower, they are met by swinging power fists, each blow able to crumple a battle tank. Other aggressor squads are equipped with flame storm gauntlets, allowing them to send fiery bursts outwards in searing sheets. This is certain death for tightly packed enemies, or for cowardly foes that thought to take refuge behind thick cover or in bunkers. In the wake of such a firestorm, nothing remains of their enemies save brittle and blackened bones, and these are soon crunched to powder as the aggressor squads stride forward to bring their next target into range. Then, the Eliminator Squads. An Eliminator Squad is composed of dedicated marksmen. These fire support Primaris Vanguard Marines haunt the shadows of the battlefield, seeking out high-value targets and bringing them down with pinpoint volleys of bolt rounds. Next, the Suppressor Squads. Suppressors are a type of fire support Vanguard Space Marine and usually members of a Suppressor Squad. Suppressors are Primaris Space Marines who specialize in rapid responses to heavily armored enemy threats, entering battle either by dropping directly into the action via the grav chutes or in long leaps using the jump packs integrated into their Mark 10 Omnis power armor. As soon as a target is sighted, the suppressors engage their shock-absorbing servo plates and let fly with their portable accelerator autocannons. The brutal ferocity of the foot-long armor-piercing shells they unleash will blast apart anyone caught in their path and force even the most stoic enemies to seek shelter from the murderous firestorm. Next, the Eradicator. An Eradicator is a Primaris Space Marine dedicated to close-range fire support, particularly against enemy armor and fortified positions. Before the molten ire of an Eradicator squad's thermal ray melter weapons, heavy armor and static defense positions stand little chance. Eradicators wear the heavier Mark 10 Gravis power armor pattern, allowing them to stride unharmed through waves of incoming fire before bringing their own destructive weaponry to bear at close range. Then, the Desolation Squad. A Desolation Squad is a squad of Primaris Space Marines who have been outfitted with multiple different types of missile launchers to provide long-ranged fire support to their battle line and close support brethren. These power armor-clad fire support specialists are an addition to the ranks of the Primaris Space Marines, laying down volleys of heavy firepower from across the battlefield. While Eradicators are forced to hustle their melter rifles into spitting distance, and Hellblasters must lug their plasma incinerators close enough for rapid fire, Desolation Marines can simply sit back and unleash a hellstorm of explosions. Traditional missile launches, such as those available to the Astra Militarum, trade raw power for flexibility, swapping out frag and crag missile payloads mid-battle. The armorers of the Indomitor's Crusade will brook no such compromise, so these new rocket weapons are specialized to fire one of two warheads. In exchange, they boast the most powerful missiles ever available to Space Marine infantry, more reliable, more powerful, and with an effective range that exceeds even a sniper rifle. The Superfrag rocket launcher is the ultimate anti-infantry weapon and a decisive rebuttal to hordes of unwashed heretics and slavering aliens. There is nothing quite like reducing the enemy's battle line to a smoldering crater with one pull of a trigger. On the other hand, when the Adeptus Astartes' foes rumbles towards them with a spearhead of hulking, armored behemoths, a volley from a supercrack rocket launcher will punch cleanly through any armored shell, be it metal or chitin. Whichever means of destruction chosen by the squad, Desolation Marines all pack a little something extra under the barrel of their rocket launchers. The belt-fed Castellan launcher can saturate the sky with guided bomblets that rain down on the enemy wherever they hide. It is the perfect weapon for flushing out cowardly targets, and it fires separately from a Desolation Marine's main rockets, allowing them to pick and choose their targets. And of course, the Infernus Squad, or Infernus Squad. An Infernus Squad is a squad of Primaris Space Marines deployed to provide close-ranged fire support to Allied forces through the use of Pyre Blaster flamer weapons. When an Imperial Space Marine force is faced with innumerable hordes of Xenos, such as a Tyranid swarm or an assault by Orc boys, an Infernus Squad is the perfect tool. Armed with Pyre Blasters that spit gouts of Promethium-fueled incandescent flame, they purge their foes with fiery wrath. Chapter Support. All of the companies of the chapter, with the exception of the Deathwing, the Ravenwing, and the 10th Company, maintain Rhino, Razorback, and Repulsor transports for each of their squads and masters. More vehicles are held centrally by the chapter armory, while drop pods are held by the chapter fleet. The Deathwing has designated land raiders, and more are held in the armory for use as requested by a company master. Although maintained by the armory, it is customary for dreadnoughts to remain a part of the company in which the warriors serve before being interred within its cybernetic sarcophagus. When not active, dreadnoughts can be found powered down in the rock's halls of silence. The Dark Angels chapter includes a large number of support staff, the great majority of whom are human chapter serfs, though there are a few Space Marines amongst their number. Most of these are non-combatants of advanced years, tasked with leading the day-to-day administration of the chapter, such as the Victualers or the Master of Recruits. A particularly vital branch of the chapter support staff is that which serves within the armory. These include the chapter's tech marines and the vast number of mono-task servitors that perform mundane work and maintenance. Next, the Dark Angels Librarians. Like their fellow Astartes chapters, the Dark Angels also maintain a librarium of potent psychers who are highly talented and trained to master the power of the warp at the highest levels. Each chapter selects its librarian in its own way, either from seed worlds as it does with the bulk of its initiates, or from the ranks of gifted psychers brought to the Scholastica Sicana. Most chapters train and test chosen psychers following the ancient ways laid out in the Codex Astartes. Librarians of the Dark Angels are trained in this way and, with few minor variances, have been taught to live by the word of the Codex. Dark Angels librarians have a number of unique psychic abilities only used by the psychers of their chapter. First, Force Barrier. Wrapping himself in a blanket of power, the Dark Angels librarian is able to create a potent but static psychic shell around himself. Next, Hellfire. The librarian is able to summon a torrent of psychic fire to burn and char his foes. The Mask of Shadows. Covering his thoughts in darkness, the librarian hides his mind from sight, confounding the efforts of enemy psychers or fearsome foes to psychically engage him. Mindworm. Driving deep into the target's mind, the librarian implants the seed of doubt and remorse, crippling the creature with indecision and guilt. True Strike. Deadly against those with the psychic gift, the effects of a true strike can smash an enemy psycher's mind to pieces. And Weaken Resolve. The Dark Angel's librarian forces his way into the minds of his foes, robbing them of their will to fight and eroding whatever mental resistance they possess. The Interromancy Discipline. In order to aid the interrogator chaplain in their cruel labors, the librarians of the Dark Angels have mastered a sinister and invasive form of telepathy. Few sensations are more horrific for a victim than the insidious slither of the librarian's thoughts as they writhe through the gaps in his mental defenses, flaying and twisting his psyche at will. First, the Mindworm, a variant and more visceral version of the standard Mindworm ability. With this power, the librarian violently burrows his consciousness into the screaming victim's brain, ripping free their secrets in a spray of gore. Then Aversion. The librarian sends waves of cold fear washing outwards. The foe find themselves unable to focus upon the psyker, their subconscious screaming at them to look away for fear of what they will see. Righteous Repugnance. Reaching into the minds of his brothers, the librarian stokes the fires of their hate, and the Dark Angels respond with a surge of cold, furious violence, enhancing their combat abilities and ability to withstand damage. Next, Trephination. The librarian gathers his thoughts into a white-hot spike to plunge straight into his victim's mind, leaving the foe's brain matter dribbling from his ears. Then Engulfing Fear. The librarian inveigles his way into the minds of his foes. Subtly, he twists and heightens their fears, destroying their morale and willingness to fight. And Mind Wipe. The librarian scourges the mind of his foe, dragging out every memory and skill that makes them who they are and reducing them to hollow shells of what they once were. Chapter Recruitment. Forget your past life. From this day on, you are simply a Dark Angel. Nothing else is of consequence. The chapter is all that matters. From Supreme Grandmaster Azrael, addressing new recruits to the Scout Company. As the Dark Angels have no homeworld to speak of since the destruction of Caliban, they draw their recruits from a variety of different Imperial planets, mainly those feudal worlds with a pre-industrial level of technology like that of Caliban before the coming of the Emperor. Representatives of the Angels visit each recruiting world once within a normal human's lifetime, and take the strongest juveniles from the population. Each aspirant is thoroughly screened, and from the moment he is accepted into the chapter as a neophyte space marine, his past becomes irrelevant. Once the recruit is accepted, he will undergo the normal rites to become a space marine. However, should he fail, his mind will be wiped clean and his body converted into that of a servitor, the mindless cybernetic automatons that carry out the laborious tasks of the chapter. The Dark Angels make use of less chapter serfs or bondsmen than other chapters of the Adeptus Astartes. They prefer the use of servitors for most chapter labor, as they fear that human serfs could be compromised to reveal all of the chapter's secrets. After the Heresy, the Dark Angels recruited from a single planet known as Plains World. Sometime before the 41st millennium, a group of returning Deathwing found that their sole recruiting world had been overrun 50 Terran years earlier by Tyranid gene stealers, with only a few untainted humans remaining among the populace. The Terminators, whose duty and honor required the extermination of the gene stealers, prepared themselves for battle. The odds of their success was nearly non-existent. So, the Terminators engage in their native death ritual. Instead of anointing their skin with white ash, they anointed their armor, changing its color to bone white. The Terminators cleanse the world and rescue the enslaved populace, and in honor of those few Terminators, the armor of all Dark Angels Terminators was ever after painted white. The Dark Angels' leadership, the Inner Circle, thereafter recognized the folly of relying upon one planet for manpower, and so diversified their recruiting grounds to include other Imperial worlds. The Fallen Angels. As the solar decade since the fall of Caliban turned to Terran centuries, the Inner Circle took shape. It grew from an ad hoc conclave to a formal, if still furtive, organization that spread through not just the Dark Angels, but their successor chapters as well. With no homeworld save the Rock, recruitment planets were founded, and new generations of Dark Angels were added to replace those lost in battle. The regiments and drills of the chapter were strict, with special emphasis on brotherhood and loyalty, ideals passed directly on to their successor chapters. However, the masters and elder warriors who led the instruction told the neophytes nothing of the sins of their forefathers. By the halfway point of the 32nd millennium, only a few interred within the sarcophagi of dreadnoughts were left of those that survived the Battle of Caliban. The truth of what occurred and knowledge of the fallen became secrets carried only by the small number of Inner Circle brethren within each unforgiven chapter. As veterans rise through the unseen levels of trust, more of the truth is gradually revealed to them by ranking members of the Inner Circle. Only then will they realize that in the millennia since the fall of Caliban, the Sons of the Lion have been fulfilling their duties to the Emperor while at the same time carrying out a hidden agenda, scouring the galaxy for signs of their corrupted kin. Whether operating alone or in small bands, each of the Fallen has found their own way of surviving the millennia since Luther's betrayal. A great many have embraced the power of the dark gods, becoming true heretic Astartes, and in the wake of the Great Rift's birth, some of these have even ascended to demonhood. Others have surfaced as leaders of some piratical, cultist cause, or have been discovered attempting to live a nomadic existence on the fringes of the Imperium. A notable few have risen to be tyrants of entire planetary empires, with multiple worlds at their command. As time means nothing in the warp, sometimes a Fallen appears upon a world having just, to his frame of reference, been plucked from the disintegrating surface of Caliban. That thousands of intervening Terran years have passed are, to him, just the blinking of an eye within the abyss of insanity that is the warp. Usually driven wild with rage, such individuals launch themselves upon the hapless servants of the Imperium, becoming a terrible force of vengeance, and raving aloud those secrets the inner circle have worked so long to keep silent. There are those amongst the Fallen who regret their betrayal of their Primarch. Unable to reconcile themselves with their former order, they lead a forlorn, hunted existence. Many become mercenaries or rogue traitors, roaming the edges of the galaxy as masterless men. Some attempt to atone for their sins, integrating themselves into human societies to work towards a noble cause. The Dark Angels often go for standard years, even solar decades, without finding any rumors or clues as to the whereabouts of one of the Fallen. When traces of them are detected, the Ravenwing and Deathwing are deployed. While both companies have gained fame for their many triumphs against the Imperium's enemies, it is for the Unforgiven's nefarious task that they are truly trained and equipped. The Raven Wing are the ultimate hunters and scouts, hurrying their quarry into a position of vulnerability before their brothers in the Deathwing arrive, the mailed fist brought swiftly down to inflict the killing blow. Any captured Fallen are taken back to the Rock. Deep inside its dungeons, interrogated chaplains inflict terrible excruciation in order to force the disgraced kin to repent. Occasionally, they do, and for their pains they die quickly. More often than not, however, the captured Fallen refuses and suffers a long, drawn-out and agonizing death at the hands of those who would save his soul. Many of these defiant traitors meet their ends with curses upon their lips, knowing their corrupted souls will find a different kind of salvation in the warp, while others simply accept it as the price they pay for cleaving to the beliefs that led them to betray their brothers in the first place. Death Watch Service. The Dark Angels have been seconding Battle Brothers to the service of the Death Watch for millennia, and Watch Fortress Eriok has several of the chapter's brethren occupying senior appointments, including the Lost Watch Captain Ramiel. As one of the greatest of Adeptus Astartes chapters, the Dark Angels have fought against every foe, and often bring huge reserves of experience and wisdom to the Death Watch upon taking their apocryphal oath. In addition, Dark Angels are known for their resolute devotion to duty, undertaking the most arduous of missions with solemn dedication. It is also whispered that the Dark Angels are not always wholly altruistic in seconding battle brothers to the Death Watch, and it is undeniable that doing so greatly aids the Unforgiven's ongoing hunt for the Fallen. Most Death Watch kill teams are made up of but a handful of battle brothers, sent alone into the far reaches of the void to pursue objectives unknown to even the highest tiers of the Imperium's government. The net is cast wide, and several Fallen are believed to have been captured by the Inner Circle following reports passed on by a Dark Angel serving in the Death Watch. And yet, the Dark Angels must observe the Apocryphon Oath, or risk bringing dishonor to their chapter and earning the wrath of the Death Watch and the Inquisition. Dark Angels often remain aloof from their kill team battle brothers, yet in time they learn that the Death Watch has its own secrets, many every bit as damning as those kept by the Unforgiven. Chapter Headquarters. The ruins of Caliban are located in the Cadian sector to the galactic north of the Eye of Terror. Prior to the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy, the death world of Caliban was covered with lush forests, inhabited by monstrous creatures warped by the proximity of chaos and the Eye of Terror. The humans of the planet were a proud, martial people, forced to live in great stone fortress monasteries. The Dark Angels eventually rebuilt their fortress monastery on the asteroid that had borne the original fortress monastery of the Order, known as Al-Duruk, the Rock of Eternity in one of the old Calibanite dialects of Low Gothic. Al-Duruk was originally the name of the mountain that the Order's founders had decided on the site to build their fortress monastery, using the name of the mountain for the fortress. Though the Order had other fortress monasteries, Al-Duruk was their first, and so they gave it a name that mattered, a name that summed up exactly what they were trying to build. This sacred site was the Order's literal rock, their foundation of stone. As long as it endured, then some part of their ideals would always be alive. The Dark Angels drilled deep into the old bedrock and rebuilt the ruins into a vast new complex with advanced Imperial technology worthy of a chapter of Astartes. The fortress monastery is known officially as Angelicasta, the Tower of Angels, but is more commonly referred to as the Rock, just like its ancient predecessor Al-Duruk, though this term is more properly applied to the dead asteroid that is all that remains of lost Caliban. Following the destruction of Caliban, the Dark Angels made the Rock their new home. Never was there a gloomier sight, for although the warp storm that scoured Caliban could not penetrate the fortress monastery of Al-Duruk's shields, they left an indelible mark. The force field over the fortress monastery held, but was rent with cracks. To this day there exists a disturbance within the field's protective shell, as if part of that tempest still rages within. Great chain lightning arcs across the artificial atmosphere that surrounds the craggy rock, briefly outlining the ruins that crown the asteroid. The Dark Angels explored the halls and dungeons that they found beneath the fortress monastery. There, they claimed the hoard of machinery that had sat untouched since the little understood age of technology. Many of the devices from that apex period of human invention still worked, like the great shield generator itself, although their mechanisms were now unfathomable. Although the extant halls were large, a massive labor carved out deeper and deeper catacombs beneath the asteroid's bedrock, excavating room for an entire Space Marine legion. With the aid of the tech priests of Mars, docks were added, allowing for the entrance of spacecraft. Although it took centuries to complete, The rock was also outfitted with warp drive engines, allowing the Dark Angels' new headquarters to travel across the galaxy through the tides of the Imperium. While the artisans did marvelous work, crafting halls full of clustered columns rising to arched vaults, and much decorated ceremonial crypts to hold the First Legion's sacred relics, it was still a grim place full of echoes and cold stone. Although only a fraction of what was once Caliban, the rock is larger than even the heaviest class of starship, and it bears formidable firepower. The sheer sides of its mass are studded with gun turrets, lance batteries, torpedo tubes, observation blisters, and communications relays. Its cavernous docking bays can accommodate many hundreds of smaller craft, including Thunderhawk gunships, Nephilim jet fighters, and even escort frigates. No effort was made to rebuild the ruined Tower of Angels atop the rock, and even now it remains undisturbed and eerily silent, protected from the cold depths of space by the same force fields that shrouded it from the destruction of Caliban. Although attempts have been made to mask it, an unusual energy signature emanates outwards from the rock, portending of some great power hidden within. Beneath these shattered ruins, many dark secrets lay cloistered from sight, and the deeper into the rock's labyrinth of dungeons one goes, the closer one comes to the truth of the Dark Angels, even truths they themselves do not yet comprehend. The warrens beneath the rock are where the Dark Angels bring their fallen angels brethren to be redeemed by their interrogator chaplains. It is believed by the Inquisition to hold many other secrets of critical importance to the Imperium. Only when a Dark Angel reaches the rank of Master, or Company Captain, does he truly learn all the secrets of the Dark Angels. But one secret is known only to the Supreme Grand Master, the Master of the Chapter, the Fallen Angels leader, the Chaos Champion Luther, is not only still alive, but imprisoned within the deepest, most secure cavern of the rock. He is incurably insane, and has thwarted the attempts of every Supreme Grand Master to make him repent to date. Luther simply rants and raves that he has no need of confession or repentance, for one day Lionel Johnson will return and forgive him for his sins against the Emperor. Near the heart of the rock lies a single cell. It is deep in the bowels of the asteroid base, where only the Watchers in the Dark and the Supreme Grand Master of the Chapter are allowed to venture. There, past locked gates that are shielded by dozens of feet of adamantium plating, is an oubliette. Its walls are inscribed with the most potent runes of warding known to men, and they have been inscribed to keep creatures out, but also to keep something within. There, sustained in life, for 10,000 standard years by a powerful stasis field, languishes the broken man who was once Luther. Luther's cell can only be reached by the Supreme Grand Master, who possesses the ancient power sword and mark of his office known as the Sword of Secrets. Fitting the blade into a cleft in the wall unlocks the iron gate, leading to a dark tunnel and the rune-protected cell in which the arch-heretic Luther is imprisoned. For nearly 10,000 standard years, the Dark Angels have kept the secret of the disastrous events that took place on Caliban at the end of the Heresy. They will never reveal the truth to anyone outside their chapter, for they could not bear for others to know their terrible shame. And all the while, deep within the rock, his continued existence known only to the Watchers in the Dark and the chapter's Supreme Grand Master, the arch-traitor Luther raves on, speaking of what is to come or emitting senseless shrieks of despair. At times, his voice assumes a grating, inhuman quality, and it tells cunning lies, or speaks words of such utter despair that to hear them is to wish for death. It is the rare moments of lucidity when Luther begs for his own end that are, perhaps, the hardest to endure, although each and every Supreme Grand Master has done so. Down the ages, the Grand Masters have had some success in using Luther as an oracle, although his warp-contaminated and deranged mind often wanders or attempts to deceive. During moments of lucidity, the Luther thing speaks of events that will be or might be, or drops hints at what is hidden and where. Since the fall of Caliban, each Supreme Grand Master has, in turn, taken the long, dark walk down to the heavily psi-warded cell. Each has tried to extract a confession from the arch-heretic. Each has tried to penetrate the madness that now clouds his mind. None have succeeded. The thing that was, and may still be, Luther has divulged many secrets, from the names and locations of members of the Fallen to the whereabouts of relics from the First Legion, secreted in the underworks beneath the old fortress monastery. Mostly, however, all that can be gotten out of Luther are mad ravings. Over and over he repeats that he has no need of repentance, for one day Lionel Johnson will return and absolve him of his sins, and he claims that day is near, and that he can already feel that the lion lies close at hand. Yet the Supreme Grand Masters still hope to gain wisdom from this dark oracle, hoping to hear Luther recant so that he might be, at last, released from the torments of life. Luther was recently freed from his prison during an unexpected attack of demons on the rock after the birth of the Great Rift at the end of the Noctis Aeterna that was led by the fallen angel demon Prince Marbas. The Dark Angels believed the attack to have little purpose other than mayhem and destruction, but Supreme Grand Master Azrael knows the truth. The attack was intended to provide a diversion, so Luther could be freed from his millennia-long captivity. His current whereabouts are unknown. Yet even the highest-ranking Dark Angels do not know everything, although they believe that they do. Buried yet deeper within the rock, hidden in its innermost chamber, is the final, greatest secret of the Dark Angels and the Unforgiven. It remains unknown to the Inquisition or the inner circle of the chapter. Only one person in the galaxy knows the full truth, the Emperor of mankind. Even in his living death upon the golden throne, even though the sunken orbits of his skull no longer have eyes, the Emperor still sees much. Hidden inside a secluded chamber at the heart of what was once the planet of Caliban, unreachable by all save the cryptic watchers in the dark, the Primarch Lionel Johnson lies sleeping. There he slumbers, his wounds long healed, waiting for that time when he will be needed again, when the clarion call of battle sounds for the last time, summoning him once again to defend the Imperium of man against its many enemies. During his duel with Luther on Caliban, he suffered a severe psychic blow which left him mortally wounded. He was then pulled into the warp and lost as the Dark Angels of that time believed. Yet what they did not know was that Johnson emerged from the warp not long after on the rock, his own abilities as a Primarch having proven to be enough of a defense to prevent the Ruiner's powers from seizing him, though he had lapsed into a coma. Once Luther was taken prisoner by the Angels, the comatose form of Johnson was also taken into the deepest chamber of the rock and placed into stasis to keep him alive. It was the mysterious Watchers in the Dark, their purposes always their own, who led the wounded Primarch to his rest deep within the heart of the rock. Yet some amongst the Unforgiven believe the Lion will eventually return for one final crusade intended to lead the Dark Angels to their greatest victory for mankind and finally bring justice to the remaining fallen angels. Others believe that the Lion will only return when the end times come and the Imperium stands at the brink of destruction. For these believers, Johnson will reappear from the Monasterium, forgive the sins of the fallen, and reunite them with the rest of the Unforgiven as they prepare to defend mankind one final time. Little do they realize that their Primarch rests literally beneath their feet. The Master of the Rock. Most Space Marine chapters have a Master of the Forge, the most senior tech marine within the chapter, with deep understanding of the arcane sciences refined over many standard years of experience. The Master of the Forge is comparable to a Magos of the Adeptus Mechanicus. The Dark Angels maintain a similar role within their chapter known as the Master of the Rock, although there is an ominous difference. Upon ascending to the honored position, the Master of the Rock follows his predecessors in the office by being permanently and cybernetically hardwired into the control nave of cogitators located deep within the asteroid base. It is his solemn duty to placate the most important machine spirits, directing the maintenance of the engines and warp drives that allows the enormous asteroid to navigate the galaxy. It is his mind alone that perceives the workings of the force field that still shields the asteroid base. The previous masters of the rock, whose bodies of flesh and bone have withered, are left in place, their mechanical upgrades still functioning while their bones fall in dusty heaps below. Eventually, these bodies will be collected for display in the alcoves of honor. Because of their dual allegiance to the chapter and the Adeptus Mechanicus, Tech Marines are never inducted into the Death Wing. This includes the Master of the Rock. He is privy only to the secrets of the Dark Angels' asteroid base and its hoard of ancient technology, but never to the greatest secrets shrouding the chapter's origins. Chapter Combat Doctrine. The Dark Angels follow the standard combat doctrine of the Codex Astartes for the most part, but their dogged resistance against overwhelming odds is legendary. The Angels will stubbornly stand their ground in combat, refusing to give ground to the enemy, even if it is tactically beneficial to do so. Though the Dark Angels have spent nearly 10 millennia hunting the fallen, the great majority of their battles have nothing to do with their heretical forebears. As loyal Space Marines, the Sons of the Lion deploy to defeat the enemies of the Imperium, as would any Space Marine chapter. Nevertheless, each battle brother is vigilant for signs of sedition on every battlefield. To most of the Dark Angels, this is simply a part of their loyalty to the Emperor. To those of the Inner Circle, anything found could be an essential clue in the hunt for the fallen angels. This is because the primary driving force of the chapter is the hunt and capture of the remaining fallen. Only by forcing every single one to repent do the Dark Angels believe they can restore their honor. If a member of the fallen or someone who may know of the location of one is present on the battlefield, they will ignore their objective and do all in their power to capture this individual. Everything else is second to the capture of a fallen angel, including any other human life. It is not unknown for Dark Angels to fire upon friendly targets in order to prevent them from discovering the secret of the fallen. Those friendly units that survive are often taken to the rock to be turned into servitors, to silence them forever. The Dark Angels also are notoriously intolerant of non-humans and mutants, even those like squats, ogrins, or ratlings, who are considered benevolent by the Imperium of Man. They're also highly mistrustful of the Imperial Inquisition, and will refuse to fight alongside any force that incorporates members of them or non-human soldiers, except in the most dire of circumstances. This is due to the fact that they do not want the Inquisition investigating the chapter or discovering its dark secrets. With the exception of the Deathwing and Ravenwing companies, the Dark Angels follow standard Space Marine combat, an organizational doctrine as written in the Codex Astartes. Tactical flexibility, rapid deployment, and combined arms are key components of their strategies. In the same vein as their father, Dark Angels officers are expert tacticians and specialists, and have been quick to capitalize on the skills of the Primaris Space Marines and the particular capabilities of their different squad types. New specialized formations have been developed to work alongside ancient patterns such as the Hammer of Caliban and Scout Recon Stalker Strike. Caliban's Reach is but one example, which combines the immense firepower of Hellblasters and Devastator Centurion squads to incredible effect. The advanced infiltration and reconnaissance skills all Primaris Space Marines learn as a part of their training in Vanguard Marine squads is of great value to a chapter seeking hidden foes whilst keeping secrets of its own. The Omni-Scramblers of infiltrator squads can severely disrupt enemy communications, enabling Ravenwing squadrons to strike without the possibility of their quarry being warned. The Divinator-class Auspexes and Transpectral Combat Visors of Incursor squads collect data from battlefields that previously would have been almost impossible to extract, and yield new intelligence for the Inner Circle to act upon without the Vanguard Space Marines' knowledge. The Chapter Gene Seed. As the first legion of the Space Marine legions, the Dark Angels' Gene Seed is one of the purest and least degraded of all. Remarkably, the Dark Angels' apothecaries have observed that the Gene Seed carried by the Primaris Space Marines is universally of the highest quality they have ever seen, and so the chapter's stock is in their quality and quantity in excellent health. There are no known aberrations in the Dark Angels' Gene Seed, which makes the reluctance of the High Lords of Terra to utilize it in the founding of new chapters perplexing. The Angels and their successor chapters, collectively known as the Unforgiven, have an unusually close bond, often working hand in hand with one another. But often these chapters have a tendency to be highly suspicious of outsiders and can be perceived as unreasonably aloof and intransigent. Indeed, there have been a number of occasions where the Dark Angels or one of the Unforgiven have withdrawn suddenly and with no explanation from a war zone when confronted by an Inquisitor or missionary. Rumors continue to persist of nepotism and legion building. Over time, these factors have led to the Unforgiven being regarded with distrust by the Inquisition and other arms of the Imperial government. Despite their impeccably pure gene seed, the Dark Angels have been passed over for many of the foundings that have created fresh chapters to fight the Imperium's wars. Yet from time to time the Adeptus Terra have been forced to permit the Dark Angels another founding, the records of which have mysteriously vanished shortly afterward. In this way, an uncertain number of Unforgiven chapters have been created, each giving every outward appearance of fighting their own wars for the Imperium, while secretly aiding in the Dark Angels' hidden hunt. In the era Indomitus, however, the traditional reluctance of the Adeptus Terran to sanction more foundings with Dark Angel's gene seed seems to be changing. In some inquisitorial circles, it is argued that this is due to Robert Guilliman's direct involvement, the Primarch recognizing the Dark Angels' genetic strength and commitment to the Imperial cause. Others contest that it is due instead to a desire in some Terran or Martian circles to increase the Unforgiven's overall strength, and thus act as a potential political counterbalance to the successors of the Ultramarines. Dark Nature. Although only the upper echelons of the chapter are aware of the awful truth of the Dark Angels' past, even those newly recruited are possessed of a secretive, even introverted nature. The idea that outsiders are not to be trusted is drilled into the recruits from an early stage, and they are tested continuously to ensure their compliance until it becomes second nature. After all, a brother who cannot be entirely trusted to keep the chapter's secrets is unlikely to advance through its ranks. Although the Dark Angels have fought beside all of the branches of the Imperium's vast military machine, they prefer to stand beside other Space Marines. Many, even Brother Astartes, find the Dark Angels aloof and uncommunicative. The Dark Angels, for their part, are impatient and unforgiving, with strangers who pry into their affairs. They're also notoriously intolerant of non-humans and will often refuse to fight alongside armies that include abhuman warriors or alien races. Yet, despite such incidents of friction, many Dark Angels have served with distinction and honor. Their taciturn nature and stubborn refusal to accept anything other than total victory over their foes has served the Unforgiven well. The chapter's beliefs. The Dark Angels chapter gives praise to the Emperor of Mankind, but, much to the chagrin of the ecclesiarchy, do not revere him as a god. Like most first founding chapters, the Dark Angels venerate their Primarch as much as they do the Emperor, who they venerate as the founder of the Imperium and as their creator. To the Dark Angels, the Emperor is a man, perhaps the greatest and most perfect of men, but not a god. The driving force of the chapter is the hunting of the fallen angels who were swept into the warp vortex that destroyed Caliban. They believe with iron conviction that only by hunting down, capturing and forcing each and every one of the fallen to repent their crime will the shame of the Dark Angels and all their successors be absolved in the eyes of the Emperor. The fallen have been scattered throughout time and space, and thus the Angels' 10 millennia quest is far from over. It is this quest that drives them, and they will follow up any rumor, no matter how slim, if it offers them the chance of recapturing one of the fallen. Should one of the fallen be captured, he is taken back to the rock and thrown into the darkest dungeon where the fearsome interrogator chaplains attempt to make him repent his past sins. Should the fallen repent, his death will be swift and relatively painless, but in most cases, he will refuse, and the chaplain will be forced to use any and all methods to force him to repent. Often this will result in the fallen's death, but this is a small price to pay for adding his name to the Book of Salvation. I will now list the most notable Dark Angels, starting with the ones from the Great Crusade era. First, we have Hector Thrain. Hector Thrain was the first Grand Master of the First Legion and led them during both the Unification Wars and the Great Crusade. He earned the right to lead his legion following his great victory against the Uruk-Hul soldiers of the great king of Akkad, with the ruler's head becoming a macabre trophy that hung from his belt. Shortly after, Thrain became the Legion's Grand Master, which also earned him the title Sinestra of the Emperor, the left hand of the warlord of Terra, his most fearsome instrument of conquest. This particular campaign proved the worth of the Legiones Astartes as a viable army, and Thrain went on to lead the First Legion against the Emperor's foes on both Terra and across the Sol system. Though the First Legion achieved momentous victories, the use of Exterminatus-class weapons to achieve their aims left an indelible stain on both the course of their campaigns and the soul of the First Legion. By the beginning of the Great Crusade, the Grand Master's actions had forged Thrain into a ruthless and prideful warlord. His continued success saw his meteoric rise in influence within the early imperial court, so much so that his counsel to the Emperor was second only to that of the regent of Terra, Malcador the Sigillite, and the Primarch Horus Lupercal. However, such prominence and success caused both the Grand Master and his legion to develop an air of extreme arrogance that led them to believe they could not be defeated. This proved to be their undoing when they faced an unnamed Xenos species on the world of Canis Bala. Suffering numerous casualties, the First Legion was put on the back foot and forced to make a tactical withdrawal in the face of the dangerous foe's superior technology that defied rational explanation. Eventually, Thrain personally led another invasion of Canis Bala after becoming enraged at both the losses and marring of his reputation. Under the Grand Master's direct command, the First Legion's forces cut a swath through the Xenos, but could not overcome their superior numbers. This led to the First Legion's near destruction at the hands of the powerful Xenos, at which point Thrain realized his hubris and pride had brought the First to the point of ruination. Seeing the futility of continuing the invasion, Thrain immediately ordered the First Legion to evacuate the surface of Canis Bala. As they began to do so, he and his lifeguard acted as a rear guard against the advancing Xenos, valiantly sacrificing themselves in order to ensure their brothers were able to successfully retreat. Once the evacuation had been completed, Canis Bala was destroyed by Exterminatus. Shortly after, Thrain was succeeded as Grand Master of the First by Urian Vendraig. Next, his successor, Urian Vendraig. Urian Vendraig was the second Grand Master of the First Legion. Vendraig was a Terran-born legionary who joined the First Legion following the end of the Unification Wars and took part in the Great Crusade. He would rise to become a captain of the 14th Company of the Legion's 8th chapter and earned an enviable record of grand victories to his name. Following the death of Grand Master Hector Thrain during the campaign of Canis Bala, to the surprise of all, Vendraig was nominated by Malcador the Sigillite to be Thrain's successor, after the upper echelons of the Legion could not agree on who should become the next Grand Master. The Sigillite's reasons for doing so were simple. Vendraig was a captain who was not enmeshed within any of the Legion's numerous factions and groups. Not bound to the allegiance of any one of these sub-factions, Vendraig would be accepted by the Legion's upper echelons as a viable compromise candidate. Malcador's insights were soon proven correct, as the First Legion's Council of Masters voted unanimously for Vendraig to succeed Thrain as the new Grand Master. Following his elevation, he was tasked with unifying a divided legion, and returning them to service in the Great Crusade. A warrior first and foremost, he saw the value of having the First Legion serving for a time on the fringes of the Great Crusade, to help it take their rightful place as one of the preeminent legions in the glories of the Great Crusade. Vendraig allowed a small contingent of carefully selected remembrances to join his entourage. Having limited access to the Legion's archives, they personally bore witness to the First Legion's ascension and helped to boost the First's reputation across the Imperium. He next sought a foe that would unite the First together in their hatred. The opportunity to do so came when word arrived of the discovery of the deadly Xenos species known as the Rangda on the far rim of the Great Crusade. Considered a growing threat to the Imperium, Vendraig brought the entirety of the First Legion to the Advex Mors system and immediately launched a purgation campaign. The following battle cost the lives of 5,000 legionaries. Despite the high tally of lives spent to eradicate the upstart Xenos, the Rangda were defeated, and the Imperium was once again reminded of the First Legion's might. However, the Grand Master's hunger for glory caused him to lead his legion in reckless actions that earned them great renown and victories, but also eventually led to the Grand Master's own downfall. The First joined the efforts of the Ultramarines Legion to bring the fortress world of Carcassonne into Imperial compliance, which had so far resisted all efforts by Primarch Robert Guilliman and his Gene sons. Utilizing a patient strategy that would bring inevitable victory while minimizing losses suffered by the Imperial forces, Guilliman had expected Vendraig and the First to follow his orders. However, the Grand Master vehemently refused, seeing a chance to snatch victory from the Ultramarines and humble Guilliman. The First Legion launched an assault upon the recalcitrant planet. In the subsequent battle, a force of 10,000 legionaries breached the world's defenses at the costs of hundreds of lives. The First's reckless advance into the inner workings of Carcassonne forced Guilliman's hand. He ordered the Ultramarines to follow the First, but they did so methodically while securing objectives along the way. This led the Ultramarines to suffer only minimal losses, while the First suffered grievously. When Vendraig was about to secure victory by claiming a citadel that lay at the center of the world, the overlords of Carcassonne detonated an atomic weapon that had lain beneath the citadel. The Grand Master and numerous warriors of the First died in the subsequent explosion. Vendraig had indeed succeeded in uniting his legion in hate, though this was only achieved through his death and his legion's ignominious victory. Next, Master Pyrrhus Caligad. During the early years of the First Legion's existence, Pyrrhus Caligad was a master of the First Legion's host of fire. He also served as the Council of Masters ceremonial champion. Upon the First Legion's reunification with their Primarch Lionel Johnson, he dueled the Primarch upon his arrival at the world of Grammari. The Lion willingly underwent this ceremonial process in order to bring the First Legion under his command. The hour-long duel between them has since become legendary. After L. Johnson emerged victorious, he was made the new Grand Master of the First, which was officially reborn as the Dark Angels. Next, Master Garadin. Garadin, known as the Ravenbringer, was a Terran-born veteran of the Unification Wars and an elderly member of the First Legion by the beginning of the Great Crusade. He was once the Lord of the Host of the Void. His service began 50 standard years before the First Legion had first stepped out of the shadows under the command of its original Grand Master Hector Thrain. By the time of the Muspel campaign, Garadin had become the first voted lieutenant and master of the Raven Wing. and next Atreus Deucalion. Atreus Deucalion, bearer of the sword Chrysor, was a knight captain of the First Legion who was also a marshal of the Fire Wing, and was counted as one of the finest swordsmen in the Legion and held station within 3 separate orders militant, blending his blade techniques of each to form a unique and deadly style of his own. I will now name the most notable Dark Angels members from the Heresy era. First, of course, Lionel Johnson. Lionel Johnson was the Primarch of the First Legion of Space Marines. Following the events of the Horus Heresy, he and his crusading fleet returned to his homeworld of Caliban. Inexplicably, they were fired upon by the Dark Angel forces garrisoned there under the command of his once trusted mentor and surrogate father, Luther, who had been entrusted with the custodianship of Caliban in his absence. Luther would eventually betray the Lion after allowing himself to be seduced by the offers of chaos, rallying a good portion of the angels who had been left behind by their fellows to garrison the Legion's homeworld to his cause, and attacking the Lion's fleet as he returned to Caliban. The titanic struggle between the two former friends resulted in the destruction of Caliban and the loss of the Dark Angels Primarch, as well as the escape of Luther's allies who had sided with the ruinous powers. Known as the Fallen Angels amongst their former battle brothers of the First, it became the overriding goal of the Dark Angels and all of their successor chapters, collectively known as the Unforgiven, after the Second Founding, to hunt down every one of the Fallen and get them to repent their betrayal of the Emperor and of the Lion. Next, Chapter Commander Maria Estellan. Maria Estellan was a Tehran-born legionary of the Dark Angels Legion who was a part of the first 5,000 intakes of potential recruits which formed the core group of the newly created First Legion. He took part in the closing campaigns of the Wars of Unification, and was present when the Emperor launched his Great Crusade to reunite the disparate worlds of mankind into a unified Imperium. Estellan would later appear in history as one of the senior officers within the Dark Angels Legion, holding the esteemed rank of Chapter Commander, and led his own expeditionary fleet which carried out numerous imperial compliances. But eventually Estellan fell out of favor with the Lion, and following his actions during the compliance of Byzanthus, was sent back to Uldaruk on Caliban, some 15 years after Luther and the rest of his training cadre had returned to the Dark Angels' homeworld. Estellan would then go on to earn the eternal enmity of his former brethren, when he later gave the order for the planetary defenses on Caliban to fire upon Lionel Johnson's fleet after it returned to the chapter homeworld from the Horus Heresy. He was cast into the warp and re-emerged into the galaxy during the 41st millennium, after which he was captured by the Dark Angels, taken to the Rock and interrogated about what had happened on Caliban, offering one perspective of those tragic events. Estellan would eventually escape from his captivity on the Rock and rendezvous with his former comrades, Methalas and Anavel. Together, these 3 fallen angels conspired with the infamous Typhus, the fallen former fist captain of the Death Guard Legion, to enact a diabolical plan to unite the 3 separate devices that made up the so-called Tucholcha engine, an ancient, sentient device and possible warp entity of unknown origin, with its brother devices in order to open a portal through time and space to 10 millennia earlier. This would allow the original legions of fallen angels to enter the 41st millennium. Utilizing captured gene seed, Estellan planned to have the Fallen, the Death Guard, and newly created Astartes merge together into one unstoppable legion that would be known as the Death Angels in order to conquer the galaxy. The notorious fallen angel known as Cypher allowed himself to be captured and warned the Dark Angels that the Tuchalcha was embedded within the bowels of the rock, and that the history of the Dark Angels would be irrevocably changed if they allowed the device to be reunited with the other two engines. Fortunately, this grand scheme of Astellan and Typhus would ultimately be foiled thanks to the efforts of Supreme Grand Master Azrael and Cypher, who managed to turn Anovel to their cause and betray his former allies. The fate of Astellan following these events remains unknown. Next, Chapter Commander Belath. Chapter Commander Belath, a Calibanite-born Dark Angel, appointed to his esteemed position by the Primarch himself, was sent to shadow the Terran-born Meria Astellan during the compliance of the newly rediscovered world of Byzanthis. The two chapter commanders held vastly different philosophies in regard to the proper use of force when attempting an imperial compliance of a new world. Though Astellan espoused that unnecessary bloodshed should be avoided at all costs, as a world brought to heel with violence would often remain resentful and willful, and would be slow to accept their conquerors as brothers, he advocated the use of diplomacy rather than wanton destruction. But Chapter Commander Belath reminded Astellan that the Lion gave him specific orders, emphasizing the use of overwhelming violence for those who remained willful and recalcitrant. When diplomatic relations broke down after a disastrous ground reconnaissance led by Astellan himself, Belath ordered an immediate retaliatory orbital bombardment. But Astellan denied the younger chapter commander's request. In the aftermath, Belath continued to argue for an overwhelming show of strength and urged an invasion of Byzanthis, preferring to attack all 6 world powers at once. But upon discovering that the world was ruled by a committee of nations, Astellan sought a last-ditch effort to parley with the planet's ruling body. Appearing with Chapter Commander Belath at his side, the parley went well at first, under Astellan's direction, but things quickly took a turn for the worst when the Byzanthis military forces detected the Dark Angels' vessels pre-positioning themselves for an inevitable attack. Under Belath's orders, the fleet had positioned themselves above all 6 of the world's capital cities. This precipitated an immediate threat response from the Byzanthians, who attempted to seize the 2 Dark Angels' representatives. Belath abruptly ended the negotiations with the committee by summoning his Terminator armored elite, who proceeded to execute the upstart politicians. Enraged by his counterpart's actions, Astellan had no choice but to go along with the impetuous Belath, and finally ordered a full-scale planetary invasion. In the aftermath, Astellan was dismayed by the use of violence, and warned Belath that his disreputable actions would not go unpunished. Belath remained unperturbed by such empty threats, and responded that it would be Astellan who would be punished, for he had already sent an astropathic relay back to Caliban, informing them of the chapter commander's cowardly actions on Byzanthis. Belath's ultimate fate following this imperial compliance remains uncertain. Next, Lord Commander Althalos. Lord Commander Althalos was the Castellan of the Chimera and commanding officer of the Alaxes outpost. A Calibanite by birth, he was introduced into the First Legion after the Lion had already turned his back on Luther and placed him in command of the Legion's homeworld. As Lord Commander of one of the first chapters raised solely under Luther's guidance, Althalos had faithfully carried out his orders for 59 years, until the rising warp storms, the beginning of the Horus Heresy, and the breakdown of communication with Luther caused him to reveal his outpost's existence and the true strength of the First Legion by saving the Space Wolves Legion, including their Primarch Leman Russ, from certain death. With proof of the Space Wolves' loyalty to the Golden Throne, Lord Commander Alphalos offered to repair the 6th Legion's badly mauled fleet in exchange for solid information on the unfurling Heresy. Lord Commander Alphalos's ultimate fate, as his true allegiance, remains unknown. Next, Lord Commander Grimm. Lord Commander Suleiman Grimm is a well-known figure within the 1st Legion, whose actions during the Great Crusade brought him much honor. As head of the 7th Expeditionary Fleet, he was instrumental in the reconquest of much of the region of Segmentum Obscurus known as the Coronid Deeps. Most notoriously on the world of Dark Haven, Grimm rediscovered the Imperial Knights household of House Orlak, and brokered a deal of mutual assistance between the Legion and the Night House. It was also under Lord Grimm's command that the Xenos Empire known as the Maitu Conglomerate was destroyed, freeing the Coronid Deeps from their inhuman rule.